The light in pre-op is the kind that tells the truth too loudly. White fluorescent. No mercy. It flattens every face and turns stainless steel into a mirror that never forgets. The overhead vents breathe a steady hum, and the room smells of iodine sterile plastic and the faint metallic bite that clings to instrument trays. Lakeview General wakes up early. Duluth wakes up earlier. Outside wind off Superior pushes cold through the loading dock seams. Inside at 6:47 a.m., the hospital is quiet in a way that feels temporary, like a held breath. Claire Mercer moves through the prep room in faded teal scrubs that have been washed too many times. Late 30s, hair pulled back tight. No rings, no polish, no scent that would linger near an open incision. Her hands tell their own story. Small scars across knuckles and the sides of fingers. Tiny burns you only get from grabbing something hot without thinking. A thin line at her right wrist, pale and straight, tucked under a cuff as if it is just another seam. On the counter, instrument trays sit open like shallow metal boxes. Claire checks them in silence. Scalpel, hemostat, Kelly clamp, retractor, needle driver. Her fingers travel across each piece the way a pianist finds keys in the dark. Weight, balance, edge, a blade that has lost its bite. A clamp that closes a fraction too loose. She knows before her eyes bother to confirm it. She adjusts the scalpel on the tray by 1/2 degree, then stops as if she caught herself doing something private in public. The doors swing open, a burst of hallway air and a flash of brighter white. Dr. Nolan Price steps in without slowing down. 29, new attending. His white coat still looks stiff like it came out of a plastic sleeve this morning. He has the posture of someone who has recently learned the room will make space for him. His shoes squeak on the tile. He glances at the wall clock, then at a clipboard, then past Claire as if she is part of the cabinetry. Laparoscopic hernia. Bay 2, he says. Tray ready, count clean. Claire's eyes stay on the instruments. Bay 2 is counted. Nolan is already moving toward the door. He pauses just long enough to tuck hair under a cap. Not long enough to look at her. You're on second shift, right? He asks like he is confirming a supply order. Mostly, Claire says. Good. He nods to the tray. Keep it that way. The door swings closed behind him. The room returns to hum and iodine. A nurse rolls in a cart, yawning into the back of her hand. He's new, she says, not unkind, not kind either. Claire tightens a strap on the tray cover. He'll learn the hallways. The nurse lets out a small laugh and wheels out. A minute later, another set of footsteps. Slower, certain. Dr. Marisol Vega enters like she belongs to the building itself. Vega has 20 years of trauma behind her, and it shows in the way she holds her shoulders. Not tense, just ready. Her eyes land on the tray, then on Claire, and they do not slide away. Mercer Vega says, Your sharps count was off yesterday. Claire's fingers still. It wasn't off. I recounted twice. Radiology found the needle in a drape fold. Vega watches her for a beat. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeps in a slow, even rhythm, like a patient sleeping. Stay focused, Vega says. It sounds like a warning and a habit. Claire's hands move again, always. Vega nods once, then turns and leaves. The door shuts. Claire exhales through her nose quietly, as if she has trained herself not to make a sound. No one asks how she knows the weight of a clamp by touch. No one wonders why she never needs the whiteboard to keep a count straight. No one notices the way she looks at the wall monitors in the hallway when she passes them, not staring, just reading. A younger tech, loud with too much morning energy, bumps the counter. A metal clamp tips, slides, and drops. It hits tile with a sharp ring and bounces. Claire's hand snaps out and catches it mid-bounce before it can skitter under the cabinets. The tech blinks. Damn, nice reflex. Claire sets the clamp into the disinfectant tray. Lucky, she says. He grins and talks over his shoulder to someone else about last night's game. The room fills with laughter that does not reach Claire. She keeps working. In the corner, a sealed airway cart waits with its red tags intact. Oxygen tank gauge full, suction tubing coiled, intubation blades lined up by size. Claire checks the seals anyway. Her thumb presses the plastic tests. The give then lets go. Her wrist itches under her cuff. She ignores it. At 7:12 a.m., the intercom crackles. The voice is flat-trained for panic. Trauma incoming. ETA 4 minutes. MVC, unstable vitals. Conversation in pre-op dies. The younger techs stop joking. A nurse straightens, eyes already scanning for gloves and gown packs. Someone mutters a curse and moves faster. Claire does not run. She just turns and starts. Gloves. 2 pairs. She snaps them on with a practiced tug. She rolls the trauma cart into position, checks suction, checks oxygen, checks the laryngoscope light. Her fingers move through a sequence that lives under her skin. The doors open behind her. Nolan walks in tying his gown strings jaw set like he is stepping onto a stage. You don't need to set up for traumas, he says. That's nursing. Claire keeps her eyes on the cart. Trauma doesn't care whose job it is. Nolan huffs, then starts scrubbing at the sink. Water runs hot and loud. More staff file in. Vega appears with gloves already on. She does not waste words. What do we know? Male mid-40s, a nurse answers, reading from a phone. T-bone collision. Steering wheel impact. Blood pressure dropped en route. Claire's gaze flicks to the monitor above the bed. It is still blank. Soon it will not be. Sirens rise in the distance, a thin wail threading through the hospital walls. Cold air rushes in each time the ambulance bay door opens. Nolan takes position at the head of the bed. Vega stands to the right. Nurses flank the sides. Claire stays near the instrument table, close enough to pass what is asked for, far enough to disappear. The ambulance bay doors burst open. Paramedics roll in a gurney fast enough that the wheels rattle. A man lies on top, pale and sweating abdomen wrapped in blood-soaked dressings. His breath comes in short gasps that sound like wet paper. BP 80/50 and dropping a paramedic says, pulse 130, abdomen rigid. They transfer him in a practiced blur. The monitor flares to life. Numbers climb, fall, and flash warning colors. The steady beat becomes faster, sharper, impatient. Exhaust and road salt followed the gurney in slicing through iodine. Claire watched the numbers stutter, then surge, then sag again, as if the monitor itself was trying to keep up with the man's body. Nolan pulled the blood-soaked dressing away and leaned in. The abdomen beneath was swollen and mottled skin tight over a hardness that did not belong. Vega's gloved hands pressed, then lifted. She did not need to say what she felt. The board stiffened in her face. Rigidity, Vega said. He is bleeding. Likely spleen or liver, Nolan replied, and his voice had the quick snap of someone trying to sound calm on purpose. He glanced at the monitor. Pressure is slipping. The beep tightened into a fast, thin insistence. 2 large bore IVs, Vega said. Get blood hanging. A nurse moved. Another called out to the blood bank. Someone cut the man's shirt away, scissors chewing through fabric. The paramedic gave a rapid handoff that turned into noise behind the urgent rhythm of alarms. Claire stood at the instrument table with her hands hovering just above the sterile field, not touching, waiting. She could feel without looking which clamp sat where. She could tell the difference between a Kelly and a Cryle by the angle of the teeth under her fingertips through the paper wrapping. She kept her gaze on Nolan's hands, on Vega's posture on the monitor that refused to settle. Nolan lifted his chin. Prep for an exploratory laparotomy? We open now. The phrase landed like a door slamming. Or one, Vega said into the room, and the room moved as one. Gowns were pulled on. Masks were tightened. The bed brakes clicked. Wheels rolled. Claire turned to the warmer, where the major tray lived. She slid it out the metal, heavy and familiar. The lid was warm against her palm. Heat rose from it in a soft breath that carried the scent of sterilized steel. Her fingers found the latches, checked the seals by habit, then stopped for half a second, the way she had stopped over the scalpel earlier. Her thumb traced the edge of the tray like it was a map. She closed her hand and pushed. In the operating room, the air felt colder, cleaner. Everything was brighter. The overhead lights turned skin into pale wax. The surgical drape hung like a wall between the patient's life and everyone else's mourning. Nolan scrubbed in and came to the table. He moved with confidence, but his shoulders sat a fraction too high. He was trying to hold himself up. Knife, he said. A nurse placed it in his hand. Nolan did not look at her. He did not look at Claire either. He looked at the incision site as if the world narrowed to that one point. Claire watched his grip. Tight. Tighter than it needed to be. The first cut was clean. Skin parted. Blood beaded. Suction hummed. Retractors opened the belly like a book no one wanted to read. Dark blood welled up fast. It ran around Vega's suction tip in thick sheets. Suction, Vega said, and the nurse adjusted. The sound changed pitch higher, hungry. Pack, Vega added. Laps went in, white squares disappearing into red. Nolan leaned in, there, left upper quadrant. Spleen, Vega said, and she sounded almost bored, which was a kind of kindness in a room like this. The monitor beeped faster. The blood pressure number dropped, flickered, and then held lower than it should. Claire's eyes tracked it without thinking. Systolic sliding, heart rate climbing, a narrow pulse pressure. The pattern was familiar the way a smell can be familiar. Her jaw tightened. Nolan clamped again. He worked quickly, not sloppy, but quick in the way people got when they felt time on their neck. Spare suction, Vega said. Another canister came online. The floor nurse moved without being told. She had done this too many times to wait for permission. Claire passed instruments as requested. Her hands were steady. They always were. It was not pride. It was survival, Clamp Nolan said. Claire placed the clamp into the nurse's palm with the hinge already oriented. The nurse blinked, then passed it to Nolan. Nolan did not notice. He was focused on the shredded tissue in front of him. He lifted the damaged spleen and worked to ligate to control to get ahead of the bleeding that kept trying to outrun him. Pressure is dropping, the anesthesiologist said. 70 systolic. Give blood, Vega replied. Is going, the anesthesiologist said. Not fast enough. Claire watched the monitor. The numbers did not behave like they should. The heart rate climbed into the 140s. The beep sounded like a bird trapped inside a box. There was something in the way the blood pressure dipped, rose a hair dipped again. Something in the way the oxygen saturation held steady while everything else ran away. The body was compensating in one direction and failing in another. Claire felt the thought form before she wanted it. She leaned forward an inch, then stopped. She kept her hands above the sterile field, careful. Nolan, Vega said quietly, "You are chasing it. Slow down. See it." Nolan's eyes flashed. "I see it!" "Then control it," Vega said. Still quiet, still dangerous. Nolan swallowed and adjusted. He clamped again, more deliberate. He tied. Suction cleared the field for a moment, and the bleeding slowed. The monitor gave a brief mercy. The pressure rose a few points. Claire exhaled. The air tasted dry behind her mask. "Okay," Nolan said, and there was relief in his voice that sounded like victory. He worked to finish. He irrigated. He checked. Vega watched every move. She said nothing unless she had to. That was how you taught when you did not trust someone yet. As they closed, Claire watched the counts. Her eyes flicked to every sponge that went in and out, every needle, every blade, every clamp. It was a language of certainty in a room built on uncertainty. "Closing fascia," Nolan said. Vega nodded. "Do it." The patient's pressure held. It was not good, but it held. Nolan stripped off his gloves with a crisp snap, then turned to the room. "Good work! Let us get him to ICU." He spoke like the hardest part was behind them. Vega did not argue. She watched the patient as the drapes came down and the bed was prepared for transport. When the gurney rolled toward the door, she glanced once toward Claire, and her eyes stayed there, a fraction longer than they had earlier. In the hallway outside the operating room, the air was warmer and smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant wipes. The world resumed its normal pace. Nurses moved between bays. A janitor pushed a mop bucket. Someone laughed near the break room like nothing in the building ever bled. Nolan walked beside the gurney, chart in hand, already talking into a dictation mic about findings and steps as if building a case for himself. He did not look back. Claire walked behind the bed near the IV pole, watching the monitor as they moved. The beep in transit sounded smaller, as if the machine knew it had less authority in the hallway. At the ICU doors, staff received the patient and pulled him inside. The doors closed. Nolan peeled off his cap and ran a hand through damp hair. He looked at Vega then, as if seeking approval. Vega gave him a neutral nod. "You got control." Nolan let out a breath and allowed himself a tight smile. "He will be fine." Vega's eyes stayed on the closed doors. "He will be alive." That was the closest she came to reassurance. Nolan glanced at Claire, as if noticing her for the first time in the past hour. His eyes flicked to her badge. "Mercer," he said, "you were quiet in there." Claire's mouth was dry. "I was working." "That is what techs do," he said, then softened it with a quick smile that did not reach his eyes. "Go restock. We have a schedule." He walked away. His shoes squeaked again, leaving a thin echo behind him. Claire stood for a second, hands at her sides. Her fingers flexed inside invisible memory, opening and closing once as if releasing tension. Vega stayed. "Your counts?" Vega asked. "Clean," Claire said. Vega nodded. She leaned slightly closer, just enough to lower her voice without making it look like a secret. "You looked like you wanted to say something." Claire met her eyes for a beat. Vega's gaze was sharp but not cruel. It was the gaze of someone who had seen fear before and did not confuse it with weakness. "I didn't," Claire said. Vega's mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost nothing. "You are not a good liar." Claire held her posture steady. "I'm not lying." Vega studied her a moment longer, then turned. "Stay near PACU today. If he swings, we will need eyes." Claire watched her go, then moved. The post-anesthesia unit was softer light and quieter voices, but the machines did not care about comfort. Monitors beeped in steady patterns over rows of patients fading in and out of anesthesia. The air smelled of warm blankets, antiseptic, and the faint sweetness of oxygen. Claire restocked the crash cart in the corner. She checked seals, rotated meds, counted syringes. She aligned everything by feel. She kept her hands busy, because busy hands left less room for the other kind of noise. Nolan sat at the nurse's station with charts spread out like a small kingdom. He was relaxed now, laughing with a resident who hovered too close, eager to be included. He looked up occasionally, smiling at nurses as if he belonged to them too. The trauma patient was listed as stable in ICU. The morning hernia case in Bay 2 was also listed as stable. The day had found its lane again. Claire listened to the monitors instead of the conversation. She could hear when a beep slowed a little. She could hear when it sped up in a way that was not just pain or waking. She could hear the difference between a body that was annoyed and a body that was failing. A nurse rolled a patient to recovery, and the wheels squeaked the same way Nolan's shoes squeaked, a small sound that kept showing up in the corners of her day. Claire finished the crash cart count and clipped the tag. She reached for a fresh pack of gauze, then stopped. Across the unit, one of the monitors changed tone. Not loud yet, but wrong. It beeped, then beeped again, closer together. A nurse glanced at it and frowned. That is odd. The beeps tightened into a continuous alarm, the kind that did not ask, the kind that demanded. Doctor, the nurse called. Nolan's head snapped up. The relaxed look fell off his face as if someone had pulled it away. He stood so fast his chair skidded back. What is it? The nurse pointed. Bay 4, vitals dropping. Nolan moved, already reaching for gloves. Claire's body moved too, before her mind decided. She set the gauze down and followed eyes on the monitor as the numbers began to fall in a way that made the air feel thinner. The patient's skin looked gray under the recovery lights. The lips had a hint of blue. The blood pressure read 60/40 and sliding. The heart rate climbed into the 140s again, a familiar frantic rhythm. The oxygen saturation held for a moment, then started to wobble. Nolan pulled back the blanket, checked the surgical site fast. No bleeding through, no swelling. He frowned harder, confusion turning sharp. I closed clean, he said, more to himself than anyone. There is no way. Vega appeared at the bay entrance, drawn by the alarm like a magnet. She took in the scene in one sweep. What happened? She asked. I do not know, Nolan said. His voice rose. He was stable. It is not the abdomen. It cannot be. Claire watched the patient's neck, the veins, the angle of the chin, the shape of the chest under the gown. She felt her throat tighten behind her mask. Nolan called for labs. He ordered fluids wide open. The nurse moved to comply. The monitor kept screaming. Claire did not speak yet. Her hand went to the bed rail, fingers curling around cold metal, grounding herself. Vega stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the patient's face. Nolan looked from the monitor to the wound site again, searching for a problem that would match the story in his head. Claire kept her eyes on the patient's chest as the alarm continued steady and merciless. The man's breathing was shallow, almost polite, like he was trying not to bother anyone. His ribs rose unevenly beneath the gown. On the left side, the fabric lifted a fraction higher than it should. His mouth opened closed. The sound was faint, a thin pull of air that did not match the frantic numbers on the screen. Nolan leaned over him, fingertips pressing along the abdomen again, hunting for blood that was not there. He is bleeding somewhere, he said. It has to be. I closed clean. A nurse hung another bag of fluid. The line ran fast, clear liquid pouring into a body that did not look interested in keeping it. Vega's gaze moved from the monitor to the patient's face, then down the chest. She did not touch yet. She watched. Claire's attention went to the neck. The skin above the collarbone looked tight. The veins stood out more than they had a minute ago, thickening in real time. The trachea subtle, but there sat a hair off center. Claire felt her pulse in her own throat. Not fear, not exactly, more like a door inside her cracking open. It is not the abdomen, she said. Nolan did not look up. Mercer, not now. Claire stepped closer, careful not to crowd the sterile space that no longer existed. Recovery bays were not sterile in the way operating rooms were, but Nolan still moved like he owned the air around the patient. Claire pointed with 2 fingers, not touching skin yet. Look at his neck. A nurse followed her gesture and hesitated. His veins are popping. That can happen with shock. Nolan snapped. He is crashing. Vega finally placed her hand at the base of the patient's neck, gentle and precise. Her fingers pressed, then slid slightly to feel the tracheal rings. She stopped. Nolan noticed the pause. His eyes narrowed. What? Vega did not answer him immediately. She moved to the left side of the chest and pressed her palm flat over the ribs. The skin felt warmer there, the chest wall tighter, as if something underneath was trying to push its way out. Vega's expression changed just a fraction. Not panic, recognition. Claire spoke again, voice low, even. Left tension pneumothorax. Silence hit the bay in a hard wave. Even the nearby nurses seemed to stop breathing for a second. Nolan stared at her. He is not showing respiratory distress. Not yet, Claire said. He will. You have minutes. Nolan's face tightened. You are a surgical tech. Claire met his eyes. She did not blink. Check the trachea. Check the asymmetry. Listen on the left. Vega leaned in toward the patient's chest and placed a stethoscope diaphragm beneath the gown. She listened on the right, then the left. On the right, breath sounds were present, diminished, but there. On the left, it was wrong. Not absent like a collapsed lung in a calm room. More like the lung had been pushed away, squeezed into a corner by pressure that kept building. Vega lifted her head. She is right. Nolan's disbelief was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was the kind that made him slow down while a man died. That makes no sense, he said. He did not have chest trauma. He did, Claire replied. Steering wheel impact, rib fracture. The pleura can get punctured later. A nurse looked between them, eyes wide. What do we do? Vega answered immediate. Decompress, now. Nolan finally moved, but he moved toward his phone. Call thoracic. Vega caught his wrist. No time. Nolan pulled back as if stung. We cannot let her do this. Claire reached for gloves. Nolan saw it and stepped in front of the crash cart. Stop! Claire's hands paused hovering, her fingers flexed once controlled. Vega's voice cut through the moment firm. Price, move. Nolan's jaw worked. He glanced at the monitor. The blood pressure number dropped again. The heart rate climbed. The alarm did not change, but it felt louder, like it was leaning closer. He stepped aside, rigid with it. Claire snapped the gloves on. The latex caught on her thumb and rolled into place with a clean pull. Her breathing was steady, but she could feel the heat building behind her sternum, a pressure that had nothing to do with medicine. Betadine, she said. A nurse's hand shook as she passed it. Claire took it without comment and painted the left chest fast, broad strokes that left the skin dark and slick. The smell hit her sharp and familiar iodine blooming over sweat and warm blankets. Scalpel, Claire said. The nurse hesitated, eyes flicking to Nolan, then to Vega. Vega nodded once. The scalpel landed in Claire's palm like it belonged there. Nolan's voice rose thin with panic disguised as authority. This is insane! Claire did not look at him. Hold his arm. A nurse gripped the patient's forearm. The man's skin felt damp. His fingers twitched a small, helpless movement. Claire found the landmark by touch, sliding her fingers along ribs until she felt the space she needed. 5th intercostal space. Mid-axillary line. The map in her hands was as clear as print. She made the incision in one clean motion. The patient jerked slightly, a groan escaped him, thin and unfinished. Claire set the scalpel down, reached for the clamp. A Kelly appeared in her hand. She did not ask who passed it. She did not need to look. Blunt dissection. Spread, down through tissue, muscle, fascia. The resistance changed under her fingers, and she knew she was close. Nolan's breathing sounded loud in the bay. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer or a curse. Claire pushed through the pleura. A sharp hiss of air burst out, loud enough to cut through the alarms. It was the sound of pressure releasing like a tire finally giving way. The patient's chest wall softened beneath her palm. The monitor responded before anyone spoke. Heart rate fell from the 140s to the 130s. Blood pressure climbed from 60 to 70, then steadied. The room inhaled as one. Claire's hand went back in sweeping with 2 fingers to clear the path. Tube. A nurse scrambled, opening the chest tube kit with shaking hands. Plastic tore, metal clinked, the tube slid free. Claire guided it in smooth and fast advancing until she felt the give of the pleural space accept it. She connected it to the drainage system, then to suction. A second hiss lower this time ran through the tubing. Bubbling appeared in the chamber, quick at first, then steadier. The patient's oxygen saturation rose. 88, 91, 94. The alarm changed pitch, then stopped. For the first time in the bay, the beep became a simple rhythm again. Not polite, not frantic, just alive. Claire stepped back and pulled off her gloves. The latex snapped as it turned inside out. She dropped them into the bin. Her hands were steady, her breathing was not. She turned toward the sink and washed her hands, slowly methodical, as if the act of washing could pull her back into the present. Warm water ran over her knuckles. Soap foamed. The smell of iodine clung under it. Nolan stood frozen at the bedside, staring at the chest tube like it had appeared by magic. His mouth opened, then closed. The words did not line up. Vega watched Claire at the sink, eyes narrowed in a way that felt like counting. Not sharps, not sponges, something else. The nurse who had handed over the scalpel kept staring at her own hands as if surprised by what they had done. The patient's color improved. The gray faded, pink returned in slow patches across his cheeks. Vega checked the tube placement and the dressing. She pressed along the incision site, then nodded once satisfied. Secure it. A nurse moved, grateful for instruction that made sense again. Nolan finally found his voice. How did you know? Claire kept washing. I saw it. You saw it, Nolan repeated, incredulous. You do not have imaging. Claire shut off the faucet and dried her hands on a paper towel slow. She tossed it into the trash without looking. You do not need imaging when the body is telling you. Nolan stared at her like she had spoken another language. Vega stepped closer, lowering her voice. Where did you train? Claire turned toward the crash cart and began resealing what had been opened. I did not. That is not an answer, Vega said. Claire kept her hands busy. Syringes back in place, betadine capped, gauze stacked. She moved as if she was restoring order to a scene that could not be ordered. Nolan stepped in front of her path. You just performed a procedure that can kill someone? Claire looked up. Her eyes were flat, but there was something behind them like a storm kept under glass. So can waiting. Nolan swallowed, his throat bobbed. He glanced at Vega as if searching for backup. Vega did not give it. She was still looking at Claire, and her expression was not anger. It was something closer to awe and something sharper than suspicion. "His blood pressure is 90/60 now," the nurse called out, voice unsteady with relief. Heart rate in 110. Vega nodded. "Good. Watch him. Chest x-ray as soon as you can, but do not delay care to get a picture of what you already treated." Nolan flinched at that. It sounded like a rebuke. It was. He walked away toward the nurse's station, shoulders stiff, pulling his phone out again, as if the device could give him back control. Claire finished restocking the cart. Her fingers did not tremble, but she felt the urge deep in her wrists, a craving to clench and release, clench and release. Vega stepped into her space again, close enough that only Claire could hear her, without leaning in. That incision, she said softly. Straight, confident, you did not hesitate. Claire kept her gaze on the cart seal. There was no time. Vega's eyes flicked to Claire's wrist, where the cuff had slid back a fraction during the wash. The thin, pale line showed for a moment before Claire pulled the fabric down. Vega spoke anyway, quiet. "People do not learn that in a county hospital." Claire snapped the cart tag into place. "People learn what they have to." Vega held her gaze. "I asked you a question." Claire lifted the crash cart handle and turned it back toward the corner. She moved past Vega, not touching her, not brushing her, but the space between them felt like contact. "I need to get back to work," Claire said. Behind her, Vega did not raise her voice. She did not chase. She just watched. At the nurse's station, Nolan was talking fast into his phone voice, low but urgent. "Yes, I want thoracic consult, recovery bay. Chest tube, placed. No, I did not place it." He stopped. His eyes flicked toward Claire. His jaw tightened as if the admission tasted bad. He turned away, lowering his voice even further. "I need documentation. I need to know what we are doing about this." Kemp's name was not spoken out loud, but Claire heard it anyway in the shape of Nolan's panic. Liability, paper, control. Claire pushed the cart into place and checked the monitor leads on a sleeping patient nearby in automatic kindness. The patient's chest rose and fell, slow and steady, oblivious to the storm that had almost reached him. She moved down the row, scanning. Beep, 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 each one different, each one telling the truth. Vega approached the station and leaned in toward Nolan, their voices low, sharp, clipped. Claire caught fragments. "You let her do it." There was no time. "She is not credentialed." "She saved him." "You do not know who she is." Nolan's laugh was small and brittle. "That is exactly the problem." Claire kept her eyes on the monitors. She pretended she did not hear. Pretending was a muscle too, one she had been using for months. When the PACU calmed, it did not feel like peace. It felt like a pause between alarms. At 4:38 p.m., Claire slipped into the staff break room. The fluorescent lights were softer here, older buzzing faintly. A stale smell of burnt coffee and microwave soup hung in the air. She sat at the corner table with a paper cup in front of her. The coffee was untouched. Her hands rested flat on the plastic surface, palms down as if holding herself in place. She stared at the wall without seeing it. In her mind, the hiss of escaping air replayed once then again, the sound too clean, too familiar. The break room door opened. An older man stepped in late 50s graying beard visitor badge, clipped to his jacket. He paused when he saw her. His eyes narrowed, then widened. Recognition hit his face like a wave. Claire lowered her gaze immediately. "Wrong person," she said before he could speak. The man took a step closer, slow, careful, like approaching a skittish animal. His voice came out rough. "Claire Mercer does not know how to do what I just watched." Claire's fingers curled against the table edge. "You did not watch anything." He swallowed. His eyes glistened. "Kunar Province," he said, and the words sounded like gravel. 2017. You kept my son alive long enough to get him to the bird." Claire's jaw tightened. The room felt smaller. The buzz of the lights grew louder. "You have the scar," he continued, softer now. "Right wrist. He told me. He said you got hit and you kept working anyway." Claire's hand moved without permission, pulling her sleeve down, covering the line. The man's mouth trembled. "He made it home," he said. "I never got to say thank you." Claire stared at the tabletop. A small smear of dried coffee stained the plastic near her thumb. She focused on that, on something ordinary. The man's voice broke on the last word. "Thank you." He turned and walked out. The door swung behind him, not closing fast enough to hide the hallway. Dr. Vega stood there still as opposed eyes locked on Claire. Claire looked up and met Vega's gaze for a single beat. Her chest tightened. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of being seen after years of darkness. Dr. Claire said, voice low. Vega did not answer. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes did not move away. Claire stood, pushed her chair in, and walked past her, keeping her shoulders square, keeping her pace even. The beep of a monitor somewhere down the hall stayed steady as she left the break room behind. Claire walked with her hands loose at her sides, shoulders level, pace even. She did not rush. Rushing drew eyes. Eyes asked questions. Questions pulled threads. The corridor outside PACU smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and the warm starch of blankets. A transport tech pushed an empty gurney past her wheels. Squeaking the same high sound, Nolan's shoes made on tile. The noise followed her like a reminder. At the nurse's station, voices dipped when she passed. Not silent, just lower, tighter, the way people talk when they do not want their words to have consequences but want them anyway. Did you hear what she did? Placed a chest tube, like actually. No way. I saw the kit. I saw the canister bubbling. She is a tech. She's not just a tech. Claire kept her eyes forward. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She drifted past the station like a shadow that refused to look guilty. Nolan stood at the corner computer with his phone pressed tight to his ear. His free hand was on the back of his neck, fingers digging in as if he could hold his thoughts in place. When he saw Claire, his jaw clenched. He turned slightly away, voice dropping. Yes, I understand. No, I did not place it. That is the issue. I need guidance. I need documentation. He listened, nodding too hard. He glanced toward Vega, who was charting with a stillness that made her look more like a judge than a physician. Nolan ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. Vega did not look up. Who did you call? Nolan's voice came out sharper than he intended. Risk management. Vega's pen paused, in the middle of a shift. I'm not losing my license because someone with a badge thinks she can improvise medicine, Nolan said. He kept his volume low, but his words were hot. Vega finally lifted her eyes. She did not improvise. She recognized and treated a life threat. Nolan laughed once brittle. She is not credentialed. She is competent, Vega replied. That is not the same, Nolan said, and his gaze flicked toward Claire again. You saw her. She was calm like she has done it 100 times. Vega's expression barely changed. Maybe she has. Nolan shook his head. That is not possible. Vega's pen moved again, the scratch of it quiet. You keep saying that word. It is not a shield. Claire walked past them close enough to hear, far enough to pretend she did not. She turned into the supply room and shut the door behind her. The room was tight with shelves and cardboard. Gauze and syringes stacked in neat grids. The smell of plastic and alcohol wipes. A humming refrigerator in the corner held meds that needed cold. The fluorescent light above flickered once, then steadied. Claire leaned a hand on the counter. Just a touch. Not collapse, not prayer. Her fingers pressed into the laminate, feeling the faint texture under the glove-free skin. Her wrist itched again. She rubbed it through fabric small and hard, then stopped. A moment later, the door opened. Vega stepped in and shut it behind her. The supply room felt smaller with her in it. Vega did not waste the space with small talk. Who was that man? Claire turned to the shelves and began checking stock like she had come in here to work. A visitor. He knew you, Vega said. Claire lifted a box of saline syringes and set it down 2 inches to the left. People think they know a lot of things. Vega watched her hands. He used military geography. Claire's fingers paused on a package of chest seals, then moved again. He is confused. Vega's voice stayed level. And you put a tube into a man's chest like you were tying your shoes. Claire faced the shelf. He was dying. Vega stepped closer, not aggressive, just present. Yes, and you were right. That is what bothers me. Claire breathed in through her nose. The air in the room tasted like cardboard and antiseptic. Does it bother you that he lived? Vega's mouth twitched. It bothers me that I do not know who is in my trauma bay. I am a surgical tech, Claire said, and the line came out flat because she had said it too many times to herself. Vega's eyes held hers. You are something. That is clear. Claire dropped her gaze first. She reached for another box. She needed her hands to have a job. Vega softened her tone without softening the question. Why hide? Claire's throat tightened. She set the box down. Because it is easier. For who, Vega asked. Claire did not answer. Outside, a monitor alarmed briefly, then resolved a quick spike in the soundscape. The hospital did not wait for private conversations to finish. Vega let the silence sit. Price called risk management, she said. Claire's fingers stilled. He would. They will call Kemp, Vega continued. Claire nodded once, as if acknowledging whether. He would. Vega studied her. You knew. Claire looked at the shelves again. This is what happens when people see something they cannot put in a box. Vega's gaze sharpened. And what are you, Mercer? A mistake in the box? Or a problem outside it? Claire's lips pressed together. I need to go back out. Vega did not move aside immediately. Not blocking, just waiting. If they come for you, I will not let them ruin you. Claire's eyes lifted. Do not do that. Do what Vega asked. Make it about me, Claire said. Her voice stayed low, but something edged into it. Make it a story. Vega held her gaze. It already is. Claire exhaled slowly, then let it stay a rumor. She stepped past Vega and opened the supply room door. The hallway hit her with noise again. Shoes, wheels, voices, the steady thrum of the vents. Claire moved back toward PACU, scanning faces without seeming to. People looked away too fast. People looked too long. The shift had changed, and the air felt different. At the PACU bay where the chest tube patient lay, the monitor beeped in a calmer rhythm. His color was better. The tubing ran cleanly from incision to chamber suction, pulling steady. A nurse adjusted the dressing. Claire did not hover. She did not claim. She checked the seal on the cart and moved on. Nolan appeared at her elbow like he had been waiting. Mercer, he said. Claire kept walking. Doctor. He matched her pace. You are not touching another patient. Claire stopped beside a linen cart, hands at her sides. I did not touch that patient for fun. Nolan's eyes flashed. You put a tube into his chest. He was dying, Claire said. And if he died, Nolan shot back, this hospital would be destroyed. My career would be destroyed. Vega's would be destroyed. You do not get to do that to people. Claire stared at him. The fluorescent light made his face look younger than he wanted it to. The anger in him read like fear in disguise. I did not do it to you, she said. I did it to him. Nolan's voice dropped dangerous. You do not get to decide that. Claire's expression stayed flat. Someone had to. Nolan opened his mouth, then closed it. His breath came out fast. He glanced down the hall where two administrators in suits had just stepped out of an elevator. One carried a folder, the other carried a tablet. They walked like they owned the floor. Nolan's shoulders stiffened. They are here. Claire did not look surprised. She turned and walked toward them. Harold Kemp led broad-shouldered, tie-too-tight eyes that measured risk as a habit. Behind him was a woman Claire had seen once at orientation legal counsel, the kind of person whose smile never reached her eyes. Kemp stopped in front of Claire. He did not offer a hand. Claire Mercer, he said. Claire nodded. Yes. Kemp looked her up and down like checking for contraband. We need to speak. Now. Vega appeared at Claire's other side, silent. She had the posture of someone stepping between a knife and its target. Kemp noticed her and tightened his mouth. Dr. Vega, this is administrative. Vega's voice was calm. Then you should have picked a room. Kemp glanced at the councilwoman, then back at Claire. A patient had an invasive procedure performed in PACU by a staff member who is not licensed to practice medicine. Claire kept her face still. A patient had a life threat treated. Kemp's eyes narrowed. Do not argue phrasing with me. Claire did not flinch, then do not phrase it like harm. Kemp's cheeks colored. You falsified your application. Claire's stomach tightened, but her voice stayed level. I did not falsify my skills. Counsel spoke for the first time, tone smooth. Did you disclose prior military medical training? Claire looked at her. No. Kemp's jaw set. That is falsification by omission. Vega stepped in. She saved a man from a tension pneumothorax. Counsel turned to Vega without changing her expression. Doctor, you understand scope of practice. Vega's eyes stayed sharp. I understand death. Kemp lifted a hand. Enough. Mercer, you are suspended pending investigation. The word landed heavy, like a weight being dropped onto a table. Around them, nurses pretended not to listen while listening anyway. A monitor beeped steady. Someone's phone vibrated. Nolan stood a few steps back, arms at his sides, watching like a witness who could not decide which side to join. Claire stared at Kemp. If you pull me off the floor right now, you are short. Kemp's expression hardened. We will manage. Vega let out a short breath. No, you will not. We are already stretched. Kemp turned to her. Doctor, your loyalty is admirable but misplaced. Vega's voice dropped lower. My loyalty is to patients. Kemp's lips pressed tight. Mercer locker. Badge. Now. Claire nodded once. Not compliant, just controlled. She turned away without another word. As she walked, she felt eyes on her back. Some curious. Some judgmental. Some grateful. The mix made her skin feel too tight. The locker room at the end of the hall was empty, the kind of empty that had echo. Claire opened her locker with a quiet click. Inside her shoes sat neatly a folded sweatshirt, a photo tucked behind the metal lip, creased edges soft. She did not take it out. She did not need to. She could see the corner of it like a wound you keep covered, but always know where it is. She removed her badge from the lanyard and set it on the shelf. Her hands did not shake until she tried to close the locker. The door resisted for a fraction of a second, then shut with a soft clang. Claire's fingers stayed on the metal a beat longer than necessary. Footsteps sounded behind her, not hurried, not soft. Vega stopped a few feet away. She did not enter Claire's space. She respected lines even when she crossed others. They are scared, Vega said. Claire's eyes stayed on her locker. They should be. Vega's brow furrowed. Of what? Claire turned slightly enough to look at her. Of what it means if I exist. Vega held her gaze. Then tell me what it means. Claire's throat tightened again. She swallowed it down. It means this place is not prepared for what comes through those doors. Vega's expression shifted subtle. She heard the truth under the anger. You are, Vega said. Claire's mouth pressed into a line. I am tired. Vega took a step closer. Careful. What happened to you? Claire looked away. Nothing you can chart. Vega let the question sit, then changed tactics. You do not have to do this alone. Claire let out a quiet laugh, one sound without humor. I have been doing it alone. Vega's eyes flicked to Claire's wrist. The cuff had slid again, exposing the straight, pale line for a heartbeat. Claire tugged her sleeve down. Vega's voice softened. That scar. It is not from hospital work. Claire's jaw tightened. People get hurt. Vega's gaze did not move. In certain places, they get hurt in certain ways. Claire faced her fully now. Her eyes were steady, but the air between them felt charged. You want the truth, Claire said. Vega nodded once. Yes. Claire held her gaze, then looked down at her hands. The knuckles, the small scars, the burns. I'm not giving it to you, she said quietly. Not here. Vega did not push. She did not soften either. Fine. Then let me give you mine. Claire looked up. Vega's voice was low. I watched you today. I watched your hands. You were not showing off. You were not reckless. You were decisive. That is rare. That is valuable. It is also dangerous in the wrong room with the wrong people. Claire's lips parted slightly, then closed. She did not know what to do with kindness that came armed. Vega continued. Kemp thinks he is protecting the hospital. Price thinks he is protecting himself. Counsel thinks she is protecting paper. None of them were at the bedside when the air came out and his heart came back. Claire looked away, throat tight. The hiss of air replayed in her head like a note that would not fade. Vega lowered her voice further. I will speak to Kemp again. Claire shook her head once. Do not. Why? Vega asked. Because if you fight them for me, Claire said, they will make you pay. Vega's eyes narrowed. I can pay. Claire's gaze snapped back sharp. Do not. I did not ask for rescue. Vega held her stare. Then what did you ask for? Claire's voice came out smaller than she intended. To work. The words hung there plain and raw. Vega's expression softened, and for the first time, Claire saw something human in the lines around her eyes. Not pity, understanding. I will do what I can, Vega said. Claire shook her head again slower. Do what you can for the next patient. Vega did not argue. She gave a single nod and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Mercer. Claire looked up. Vega's voice was quiet. If they force you out, you will not disappear. Not after today. Claire's chest tightened at the statement. She did not answer. Vega left. Claire stood alone in the locker room, listening to the distant beeps of monitors through walls. Steady rhythms. Lives continuing without her hands on them. For a moment, that should have been relief. It was not. She picked up her sweatshirt and pulled it on the fabric, soft and warm against the cool air. She slung her bag over her shoulder. Everything she needed fit in it, because she had learned long ago not to gather possessions that could slow you down. When she stepped into the hallway, Nolan was waiting near the elevators. He looked uncertain, like a man who had shouted and now regretted the sound of his own voice. He opened his mouth. Claire kept walking. Mercer, he said again, quieter. Claire. She stopped just long enough to look at him. Nolan's eyes flicked toward the trauma bay doors, the place where alarms came from, the place where confidence got tested. I did not mean for it to go like this, he said. Claire studied his face. She saw the fear under the arrogance and the stubbornness under the fear. It went like this because you made it about you, she said. Nolan flinched. I was trying to keep everyone safe. Claire's gaze did not soften. Then start by listening when someone says a patient is dying. Nolan swallowed. He nodded once. Once. Small. Claire turned away and walked toward the exit, the hospital air changing with each step. Disinfectant to cold metal to the faint draft from outside doors. At the main entrance, the glass reflected her back at her. Teal scrubs under a sweatshirt. Hair tight. Face blank. Hands that looked ordinary until you watched what they did. She pushed through the doors. Outside Duluth, wind cut across the parking lot sharp enough to sting. Claire pulled her hood up and walked to her car, the cold making her eyes water. Behind her, the hospital continued. Beeps, vents, wheels, voices. Claire put her hand on the car door handle and paused. For a brief moment, she felt the shape of that visitor's voice in her bones. Kunar Province. She got into the car and shut the door, sealing the sound out, but not the memory. Claire got into the car and shut the door, sealing the sound out, but not the memory. The windshield was filmed with a thin grit of road salt. The parking lot lights threw pale cones onto the snow piled along curbs. Her breath fogged the glass for a moment, then faded. She sat without turning the key hands, resting on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 as if someone might grade her on it. Kunar Province. The words had landed earlier, like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples were still moving through her. She started the car. The heater coughed cold air, then began to warm. Claire drove out of the lot and onto the road that ran along the lake. Superior was a dark sheet beyond the guardrail, the surface invisible but present. Wind shoved at the car hard enough to make it drift a fraction in its lane. At a stoplight, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Hood up, face washed out by dashboard glow. The expression was the same one she wore under surgical lights, controlled and distant. It had kept her alive in rooms where control was the only thing that belonged to her. The light turned green. She drove. Her apartment was on the second floor of an old building with narrow stairs and a hallway that smelled faintly of laundry soap and fried onions from someone else's dinner. Inside it was quiet, in the way only a solitary place could be. No television, no music, just the refrigerator hum and the soft tick of a radiator. Claire dropped her bag by the door and stood for a moment, listening as if the air might tell her what was safe to feel. She went to the sink and washed her hands, not because they were dirty, because the motion did something to her mind. Water, soap, rinse, dry. A ritual that said the world could be reset in small ways. The cuff of her sweatshirt rode up. The thin, pale line on her right wrist caught the light. Claire stared at it, then pulled the sleeve down with a quick practiced tug. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She watched it ring twice before answering. Mercer, a voice said. Vega. Not softened by distance. Still sharp. Claire closed her eyes. Doctor. You left, Vega said, and it was not accusation. It was fact. I was told to, Claire replied. There was a pause. Claire could hear hospital noise behind Vega, muffled voices, a monitor tone, the constant ventilation hum. Kemp suspended you, Vega said. Risk wants statements. Legal wants signatures. Claire leaned her hip against the counter. Let them want. Vega's voice tightened. See, Price is blaming you. Claire let out a short breath. He would. Do not shrug, Vega said. You saved a patient. You did it cleanly. You did it right. And you did it without authority. Claire's throat tightened. Authority was not available. Vega held the line for a beat, then lowered her voice. Who are you? Claire's jaw set. You do not have enough time. I have enough, Vega said. Give me one truth. Claire stared at the blank wall above the sink. The paint had a small crack near the corner. She focused on that, a harmless fracture. I was in the army, she said. Vega did not react out loud. What was your job? Claire hesitated, then answered in the flattest tone she could manage. Medical. That is not a job, Vega replied. That is a category. Claire's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. Combat medic, then surgical support. A longer silence. Vega's breathing came through faintly. Forward Team Vega said not a question. That is what your hands look like. Claire did not answer. Vega continued anyway. Why are you here in Duluth hiding under a tech badge? Claire's stomach tightened. Because I wanted it quiet. Quiet is not the same as safe, Vega said. Claire's voice came out low. It is close enough. Vega exhaled once controlled. Kemp is meeting with counsel and risk. I told him you are not a criminal. I told him you are an asset. Claire's eyes closed. Do not. I already did, Vega said. He is furious. He is also listening, which is rare for him. Claire swallowed. Why? Vega's answer was simple. Because I watched your hands bring someone back from the edge, and you did not look proud. You looked tired. Claire's grip on the counter loosened slightly. Vega added, Come in tomorrow morning, conference room. Kemp wants to see you. That is not a request, Claire said. No, Vega replied. It is not. Claire's chest tightened and settled. She had expected this. Still, expectation did not make it lighter. I will be there, Claire said. Vega's voice softened by a fraction. Bring whatever paperwork you have. Anything about training. Anything that proves you are not guessing. Claire looked toward the small desk in her living room. A plain surface, a stack of bills, a bowl of keys, a drawer she rarely opened. I do not keep souvenirs, Claire said. You might need one, Vega replied. The line went quiet, then Vega spoke again, the edge returning, and Mercer. Yes. If you disappear, they win, Vega said. Claire did not respond. Vega hung up. Claire stood at the counter with the phone in her hand, listening to the sudden silence. Her wrist itched again, deeper this time under the skin. She walked to the desk and pulled the drawer open. Inside was a brown envelope, worn at the corners, the kind of thing that had been handled too many times to still feel like paper. She stared at it for a moment before pulling it out. The first item inside was a folded document, discharge papers, a name typed in black. Claire Elise Mercer. Below it, in smaller lines, a string of identifiers she had tried to forget. She set it down and reached back into the envelope. A photo came out next. 5 people in dusty uniforms, faces sunburned, grinning at a camera that had no business being in that place. The background was a tent wall and the edge of open sky. They looked young and older at the same time, the kind of look you only get when time is measured in minutes. Claire's thumb pressed the corner of the photo and held it there. She did not unfold it fully. She never did. Seeing all 5 faces at once was like taking a deep breath of smoke. A small object fell from the envelope and landed on the desk with a soft clink. A medal, bronze and heavy, the surface dull from being handled and put away and handled again. A ribbon folded beneath it, neat, military, precise. The kind of precision that made Claire's throat tighten. She stared at it without picking it up. The radiator ticked, the refrigerator hummed, outside wind pushed against the building. Claire closed the envelope and slid it back into the drawer, leaving the medal on the desk. She stared at it for another long moment, then walked away to the bedroom. Sleep did not come quickly. It never did. It arrived like a reluctant visitor, and it left too easily. When she finally drifted off, she did not dream in stories. She dreamed in fragments. Canvas snapping in wind. A flashlight beam bouncing across gloves, slick with blood. A man yelling a name that was not hers. The smell of diesel so thick it coated the back of her tongue. She woke at 2:11 a.m. with her heart beating too fast and her hands already clenched. Claire sat up, forced air into her lungs, then out. She counted the breaths without speaking. The room was dark. The streetlight outside painted a pale rectangle across the floor. Her wrist throbbed under the sleeve. She swung her legs out of bed and walked to the kitchen. Water from the tap was cold enough to sting. She drank it anyway. Then she washed her hands again. Morning came in a thin, gray line over the lake. Duluth did not do dramatic sunrises. It did slow, quiet light that made everything look honest. Claire dressed in plain clothes, jeans, a dark sweater, hair pulled back tight. She tucked her discharge papers into her bag, then hesitated at the desk. The medal still sat there. She stared at it, then slid it into the envelope, as if locking it away could keep it from speaking for her. At 7:48 a.m., she walked into Lakeview General through the employee entrance. The air hit her with disinfectant and coffee and the faint warmth of bodies moving through corridors. The hospital was awake and hungry. People looked at her, not the usual invisible glance. Now it was direct, curious, cautious, respectful, angry, all of it mixed. Someone whispered her name, not Mercer. Something else. Something they had overheard. Claire kept walking. The conference room sat off the main corridor glass walls that made it feel both public and isolated. Inside a long table held a pitcher of water and a stack of folders. Harold Kemp sat at the head tie, straight, expression tight. The councilwoman sat beside him with a laptop open. Nolan sat a few chairs down, posture stiff. Vega stood near the window, arms folded, watching Claire enter. Claire took the chair at the far end without asking. She placed her bag on the floor and sat with her hands on the table, palms down, as if anchoring herself. Kemp cleared his throat. Ms. Mercer. Claire looked at him. Mr. Kemp! Counsel gave a smooth smile. Thank you for coming. Claire did not smile back. Kemp slid a folder forward. We are investigating an incident that occurred yesterday in PACU. A patient received an invasive intervention from a staff member without medical licensure. Claire kept her face still. The patient received treatment for a life-threatening condition. Kemp's eyes narrowed. Do not reframe. Claire's voice was level. Do not distort. Nolan shifted, and when he spoke, his tone carried defensive heat. You did not have authorization. You did not ask. You just acted. Claire turned her head slightly to look at him. You told me to stop. His blood pressure was 60/40. Nolan's jaw clenched. That does not matter? We have protocols. Vega's voice cut in calm and controlled. Protocols do not treat tension pneumothorax. People do. Counsel lifted a hand, polite, shutting the room down. Dr. Vega, we are not debating clinical decisions. We are addressing liability. Claire's gaze snapped to Counsel. Then address the liability of a dead patient? The councilwoman blinked once, surprised at the directness, then recovered. We also need to address misrepresentation in your hiring documents. You did not disclose prior military medical training. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out the discharge papers. She placed them on the table. The paper looked too plain for the weight it carried. I did not disclose, Claire said. Kemp's eyes flicked to the documents. What? Claire's fingers pressed lightly into the tabletop. Because it would have made this happen sooner. Nolan scoffed. So you admit you hid it. Claire looked at him. I admit I wanted to work without being questioned every time I breathed. Vega's gaze stayed on Claire, unreadable. Counsel typed something. What was your role in the military? Claire's throat tightened. She kept her voice flat. Combat medic. Then attached to a forward surgical element. Kemp sat back slightly. So you were performing procedures? Claire did not answer directly. I was doing what was necessary to keep people alive until they reached a surgeon. Sometimes that meant there was no surgeon. Nolan's eyes widened a fraction. He looked at her, really looked as if the story was finally catching up to the person in front of him. Kemp's mouth tightened. You understand how this looks. Claire nodded once. Yes. Counsel's tone was careful. Have you performed any other interventions outside your scope at Lakeview General? Claire's eyes shifted to Vega, then back. No. Nolan snorted softly. That is hard to believe. Claire's gaze went to him cold. Believe what you want. Check the records. Vega spoke quiet but firm. I checked. Her counts are perfect. Her work is meticulous. She has not been playing doctor. Kemp frowned. Then why yesterday? Claire held Kemp's gaze. Because a man was dying and the people with authority were arguing with reality. The room went silent for a beat. Counsel said, this hospital cannot allow unlicensed practice. Vega replied, this hospital cannot allow preventable death. Kemp rubbed his forehead, irritation and fatigue mixing. Both of those statements can be true. Claire sat still, shoulders squared, breathing steady. Inside, something churned, a low burn that had nothing to do with anger. More like the feeling of being trapped in a tent with the walls closing in. Kemp looked at the discharge papers again. You have training, you have experience. None of it is verified through civilian channels. Claire nodded. Correct. Counsel added, we can contact the Department of Defense to confirm service and roles. Claire's stomach tightened. Do that if you want. Kemp's eyes narrowed. You sound like you do not care. Claire's voice stayed flat. I care. I'm just not begging. Nolan leaned forward, frustration pushing him. You do not get it. You put all of us at risk. Claire turned to him. You put that patient at risk when you refused to look at his neck. Nolan's face flushed. That is not fair. Vega's gaze sharpened toward Nolan. It is accurate. Nolan looked away, jaw tight, embarrassed and angry at the same time. Kemp exhaled. Here's what will happen. You will remain suspended from clinical areas until we determine a safe role for you. You will not touch patients. You will not perform procedures. You will not present yourself as anything other than your hired position. Claire's fingers pressed into the table. And what is my hired position? Kemp stared at her. Surgical technician. Claire nodded once. Fine. Vega's voice held a question under the words. Harold, that leaves a gap. Kemp's eyes flicked to her. We will cover it. Vega did not budge. With who? Kemp's expression tightened. Hated. We will cover it. Claire's jaw clenched. She could see the shape of the truth. They were short. They were tired. They were proud. Pride would cost them. It always did. Counsel closed her laptop softly. We will be in touch with next steps. Kemp stood signaling the meeting was over. Claire gathered her discharge papers and slid them back into her bag. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the heat behind her ribs again, that pressure that wanted out. As she stood, Nolan spoke quieter now, less performance and more honesty. Were you really in places like that? Claire looked at him. Does it matter? Nolan's mouth opened, then shut. He seemed to wrestle with something, then said, I did not know. Claire held his gaze for a beat. You did not ask. She walked out of the conference room. In the hallway, the hospital noise returned. Phones ringing, footsteps, a distant page overhead, a gurney rolling past wheels squeaking. Vega caught up to her near the elevator bay. She did not touch Claire's arm. She did not try to stop her. She simply walked beside her. I pushed Kemp, Vega said quietly. He is stubborn. He is also scared. Not of you, of what you represent. Claire stared straight ahead. The truth. Vega nodded. And the truth is, we need you. Claire's laugh came out soft, humorless. You just watched him take my badge. Vega's eyes stayed forward. Badges can be returned. Claire's throat tightened. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Vega glanced at her. I am not promising. I am stating a fact about systems. Systems bend under pressure. Claire stopped walking and faced Vega. The elevator doors opened behind them with a soft chime, then closed again when no one stepped in. You heard him, Claire said. No clinical areas. Vega's expression was steady. Then we find a way that does not require you to be in one. Claire stared at her. That is not where I am useful. Vega's voice lowered. You think usefulness only counts when your hands are inside someone? Claire's eyes narrowed. That is not what I said. Vega met her gaze. It is what you believe. Claire looked away, jaw tight. Vega continued quieter now. The man in the break room. Tom Baird. His son was brought through my bay years ago at a different hospital. Not the same case, not the same day. But I recognize that kind of gratitude. It does not come from routine care. Claire's chest tightened. Do not talk about him. Vega nodded once. Fine, then talk about you. Claire's eyes flashed. There is nothing to talk about. Vega's tone stayed calm. You are here. You are breathing. You are working in a county hospital as a tech. People do not do that after forward teams unless they are running from something. Claire's fingers curled, then released. Vega watched her hands. Is it guilt? Claire's voice came out almost inaudible. It is math. Vega frowned. What? Claire swallowed, then said it plain. How many I saved? How many I did not? Vega's expression softened. Not pity. Recognition. She had her own list, even if she never wrote it down. You cannot balance that ledger, Vega said quietly. Claire's eyes hardened. Watch me try. Vega did not argue. She nodded once slow. All right. A page echoed overhead. Code blue, ICU room 12. Claire's head lifted instinctively toward the sound body, ready to move before permission. Then she remembered she did not have a badge anymore. Vega saw it. She saw the flinch, the restraint, the frustration. Vega's voice was low. Go home. Get some rest. Claire looked at her. Rest does not change anything. Vega held her gaze. No, but it keeps you alive long enough to do something with what you are carrying. Claire's throat tightened again. She did not answer. She turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, the wind off Superior bit at her cheeks. She pulled her collar up and stepped into the parking lot, boots crunching lightly on packed snow. Halfway to her car, she saw Tom Baird standing near the curb by the main entrance. No visitor badge now, just a worn coat and hands shoved into pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked like a man who had driven back and forth all night because going home felt impossible. Claire stopped. Tom saw her and did not move closer. He stayed where he was, giving her space, like he understood what space meant. I did not come to corner you, he said. Claire's voice was flat. Then why are you here? Tom swallowed. My son told me you would run. Claire's jaw tightened. Tom continued, careful. He told me you would think you did not deserve thanks. He told me you would say you were just doing your job. He told me you would act like saving him was nothing. Claire stared at him. Her breath fogged in front of her face, then vanished into the wind. Tom's eyes glistened. It was not nothing. Claire's throat tightened. Where is he now? Tom's face shifted, grief and pride mixing. He is alive. He is in Wisconsin. He is walking again, not like before, but he is walking. He has a job. He laughs. He is stubborn. You would hate him. Claire's mouth twitched almost a smile, then it disappeared. Tom reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded photo. He did not extend it immediately. He held it at his side. I brought this because he asked me to, he said. Not to guilt you, not to drag you back, just to show you what your hands did. Claire stared at the photo without taking it. Tom waited. Finally, Claire stepped closer and took it. It showed a young man standing on prosthetic legs, one arm around a woman, both of them smiling into bright sun. The smile was real, not for the camera, for the fact of being there. Claire's chest tightened so hard it hurt. She held the photo with both hands as if it might fall apart. Tom's voice was soft. He is getting married next month. Claire stared at the image, then lowered it. I cannot. Tom nodded as if he had expected that answer too. He told me you would say that. Claire's fingers curled around the paper's edges. You do not understand. You do not want me at your table. Tom's eyes held hers. I want the woman who kept my son alive to know she did not only save a body, she saved a life. Claire's breath caught. She looked away toward the hospital doors, the glass reflecting lights and movement inside. Tom did not push. He simply said, if you ever decide you can stand in a room with people who are alive because you refuse to quit, there will be a chair. Claire swallowed. The wind cut across the lot again, stinging her eyes. She handed the photo back. Tom took it gently like it was fragile. Thank you for looking. Claire nodded once. Words did not come. Tom stepped back. Take care of yourself, Claire. He turned and walked toward his truck, shoulders hunched, boots crunching on snow. Claire stood still for a long moment, watching him go. Then she looked down at her own hands, the small scars, the straight line under her sleeve. Her fingers flexed once open and closed like she was trying to release something that did not want to be released. The hospital behind her kept breathing. Vents, lights, beeps that rose and fell and rose again. Claire turned toward her car and walked steady, controlled, carrying the weight of a name she had tried to bury. The hospital behind her kept out breathing. Vents, lights, beeps that rose and fell and rose again. Claire turned toward her car and walked steady, controlled, carrying the weight of a name she had tried to bury. Her key was in her hand when the first siren cut across the parking lot, not the distant urban wail that drifted and faded. This one came hard, close, fast. It was joined by another, then another, stacking into a single urgent noise that made the air feel thinner. Claire paused beside her driver door and looked back. An ambulance swung into the bay with lights strobing across snowbanks. A second followed, so close the tires kicked up slush. The overhead doors lifted. Warm air rushed out. Cold rushed in. Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket, a group text from staff she was still attached to even without a badge. Multiple incoming, industrial accident, paper mill. Her stomach tightened. Duluth lived by the lake and the mills by iron and pulp and shipping. When something went wrong there, it went wrong in a way that did not stay contained. She climbed into her car, shut the door, and sat for one beat with her hands on the wheel. She could drive away. She could keep going until the hospital was a pale block of light in her mirror. Then the intercom crackled through the open ambulance bay doors, a flat voice amplified by speakers mounted too high to look at. Mass casualty incident, industrial explosion at North Shore Paper. All available personnel to trauma. Repeat, all available personnel to trauma. Claire's grip tightened until her knuckles whitened. She stared at the steering wheel as if it might tell her what was allowed. Suspended pending investigation. No badge, no clinical areas. Her mind tried to build a wall out of those words. Her body did not respect it. Claire opened the door and stepped out into the cold. Wind hit her cheeks sharp enough to sting. She walked back toward the entrance, boots crunching on packed snow breath, fogging in front of her face. Inside the lobby was brighter than the parking lot, warm air smelling of coffee and disinfectant. The usual flow of visitors had turned into a tense knot of people looking toward the hallways, listening for updates they would not get. Claire moved past the security desk. The guard looked up, then looked down at her lack of badge. "Ma'am," he started. Claire did not stop. Trauma. The guard hesitated. He was not used to being ignored by someone who moved like she belonged. He started to step out. A voice cut in from behind him. "Let her through." Dr. Vega strode into the lobby, hair tucked under a cap mask hanging loose around her neck. Her eyes locked on Claire. "She is suspended," the guard said. Uncertain. Vega's gaze did not flicker. "Then suspend her after people stop dying." The guard glanced between them, then stepped aside. Claire and Vega moved together into the main corridor, past the elevators, past the nurses' station, where faces turned toward them with a new kind of intensity. The rumor had not stayed a rumor. It had become a shape people could point at. Nolan stood near the trauma bay doors with a trauma clipboard in his hand. His white coat was gone. He wore scrubs and a gown half-tied, hands gloved, eyes wide. The confidence from earlier had drained out of him, leaving something younger. He saw Claire and his face tightened. "You cannot be here," he said. Vega did not slow. "Then you can ask her to leave when you have 12 patients and 2 hands." Nolan's jaw clenched. "Kemp will have my head." Vega looked at him. "Better than counting bodies." Claire said nothing. Her attention was on the doors, on the empty stretch of floor where gurneys would appear, on the sound outside, the sirens multiplying into a constant. The trauma bay felt different at night. The lights were dimmer in the hallway but harsh inside the rooms. The air was cooler, the staff fewer, stretched thinner, the kind of thin that tore. A nurse ran in carrying extra blankets and chest seals. Another rolled in a second crash cart. The charge nurse shouted numbers into a phone, trying to create order out of incoming chaos. Claire moved to the supply wall, hands already sorting. Gauze, tourniquets, airway kits. She pulled extra chest tube sets and placed them where she could reach without looking. She checked suction canisters, made sure they were hooked ready. She did not ask permission. She did not announce. She acted. Vega watched her for half a second, then turned back to the bay. The first gurney slammed through the doors. A man in his 20s, face blackened with soot hair, singed eyes wide with shock. His chest rose and fell in short, shallow pulls. Burns blistered across his arms. A piece of metal protruded from the side of his ribcage like a jagged handle. "Crush injury," the paramedic shouted. "Possible flail chest. BP 90/60. SAT 85 on oxygen." "Bed 1," Vega called. They transferred him fast. The monitor snapped on. Beeps jumped into frantic rhythm. The second gurney came in before the first was settled. A woman unconscious, blood dark against her shirt, a shard of metal embedded low in her abdomen. Her skin looked waxy. Her lips were pale. Penetrating, the paramedic said. Pressure dropping. No radial pulse. "Bed 2," Vega said. A third gurney. A fourth. Each one bringing a different kind of damage. Each one demanding time the room did not have. Claire's eyes took it in without freezing. She saw the way bodies moved, the way oxygen masks fogged, the way hands shook, the way some patients screamed and some did not make sound at all. Nolan stepped forward, trying to impose a system. Red tags to OR, yellow to secondary. "We need triage. We need order." His voice was loud enough to be heard and thin enough to break. A monitor screamed from bed 3. A flat line tried to appear, then stuttered back. "Code," a nurse shouted. Another alarm joined it, then another. The bay became noise. Beeps layered over voices, layered over the constant rush of oxygen and suction. The air filled with the smell of blood and burned fabric. The lemon disinfectant disappeared under smoke and sweat. Nolan moved from bed to bed, hands hovering. He pressed on a wound. He listened to breath sounds. He looked at the crowd, at the limited space, at the patients stacked into the hallway because the rooms were full. His eyes darted, searching for the right move. Too many right moves, too little time. A patient in bed 5 gasped, then went still, eyes open. The monitor tone shifted into a single piercing note. "Busy. Compressions," Vega snapped. A nurse climbed onto the bed and started chest compressions, shoulders pumping, jaw clenched. Another patient's oxygen saturation dropped into the 70s. lips turning blue. The nurse's voice rose. He is crashing. I need help here. Nolan took a step toward that bed, then turned toward the code, then looked back at the hallway where another gurney was arriving. He froze. Not long. 1 second, 2. But in a room like this, seconds were currency. Claire saw it. She stood in the corner near the supply wall, hands full of chest seals and tape, watching the hesitation spread like a stain. She felt something inside her tighten, then settle, as if a part of her had been waiting for this moment, even while she ran from it. She gave herself 3 seconds. Then she stepped forward. Stop, Claire said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It cut through the room because it carried certainty. For a fraction of a beat, people actually stopped. Even compressions slowed for half a second before the nurse corrected, continuing. Heads turned. Eyes found Claire. Nolan's mouth opened. You cannot just... Claire raised her hand, palm out, a simple command. Listen. Vega's eyes locked on Claire. She did not look surprised. She looked relieved. Claire's gaze swept the room. Airway bed 2. He is swelling. Prepare to intubate. Bolt. Bag him now. Oxygen 100%. A respiratory therapist. Snap to... Now to that bed. Bed 1, Claire continued pointing. Sucking chest wound. Seal it, then decompress if his pressure keeps dropping. Vega moved without hesitation, hands already on the burned man's chest, feeling for instability. Bed 5, Claire said, eyes cutting to the blue patient. Tension. Needle now. A nurse hesitated, then looked to Vega. Vega nodded once and the nurse moved. Bed 3, Claire said, looking straight at Nolan. You are on that abdomen. Hold pressure. Do not let go. Call for OR when you have control. Nolan stared at her. Something in his expression shifted. Anger tried to rise. Fear swallowed it. Now Claire said to him, quiet and sharp. Nolan's hands went down onto a bleeding abdomen and held firm, steady. His shoulders dropped a fraction. The hovering stopped. The work began. Claire moved to bed 5. The patient's chest rose high on one side, barely on the other. His face was gray. His eyes rolled. I need a 14 gauge, she said. A nurse thrust a needle into her hand. Claire found the second intercostal space by touch, mid-clavicular line, skin slick with sweat. She pushed the needle in. A hiss burst out loud and immediate. The patient's body jolted like it remembered how to live. Color returned in streaks. The monitor tone softened. Chest tube kit, Claire said. A nurse ran, returned, hands shaking. Claire took the kit and opened it with fast, precise motions. Incision, blunt dissection, a clean push through pleura, another rush of air. She placed the tube-connected suction. Bubbling. Relief. She did not pause to admire it. She moved. Bed 2. The unconscious woman's neck looked thick. Her tongue sat too far back. Her face was swelling with smoke inhalation. Claire placed fingers at the jaw, lifted, assessed. The airway was closing. Laryngoscope, she said. Resident stepped in, young eyes wide. I can... Claire looked at him once. Not harsh, just direct. Then do it. Now. His hands shook. He raised the blade, hesitated. Claire's voice dropped calm and firm. Breathe. Look. Do not hunt. See. He tried again. He saw the cords. He passed the tube. Confirm, Claire said. Breath sounds. So too color change. The monitor steadied. Secure it, Claire said, and the resident's face changed with a flash of disbelief at what his hands had just done. Claire moved again. A man in bed 6 had a pelvis that moved wrong under pressure. Unstable. Bleeding into a space you could not see. His skin was cold. His pulse thready. Pelvic binder, Claire said. Now, 2 nurses wrapped and tightened. The bleeding slowed enough to buy minutes. Or when you have room, Claire told the charge nurse. If you do not have room, make room. The charge nurse swallowed, then nodded. A new gurney arrived in the doorway, a teenager with blood in his mouth, eyes huge, clutching his own throat. Panic made his breath shallow. Claire stepped to him and put a hand on his shoulder, steady pressure. Look at me. His eyes locked on hers, and Claire said, breathing with him, out. His chest followed the rhythm, enough to get him through the doorway without drowning in his own fear. She guided him to a bed and assessed the neck wound. Not deep, not arterial. He could be stabilized. Pressure dressing, she said. He goes yellow. The bay began to move differently. Not calmer. Still chaos. But it became directed chaos. Commands had edges. People had tasks. The shouting turned into shorter phrases. The beeps began to separate into individual lives rather than one wall of noise. Vega worked in sync with Claire without needing explanation. She sealed a chest wound, then reached for a needle. She decompressed, then moved to the next. Her eyes flicked to Claire, between actions measuring trusting. Nolan held pressure on the abdomen in bed 3, jaw clenched, arms burning. Blood soaked through his gloves. A nurse handed him fresh gauze. He replaced it without lifting his hands fully, just as Claire had told him. He looked up once across the room and saw Claire at the center of it, moving from patient to patient, voice steady, hands fast. He looked like a man watching a storm from inside the storm. "Who are you?" Nolan whispered. Claire did not hear him, or if she did not answer. A patient on compressions regained a weak rhythm. The monitor tone returned shaky, but present. The nurse doing compressions sank back, chest heaving, sweat dripping from her hairline. "We have a pulse," she said, voice cracking. "Good," Claire replied, already turning to another bed. "Ventilate. Prepare epi if needed. Do not celebrate yet." The words were not cruel. They were protection. Hope was dangerous when it made people stop working. The hallway outside trauma filled with more staff drawn by the page. A radiology tech arrived with a portable machine. Respiratory brought extra tanks. A surgeon from another unit ran in, eyes scanning for instruction. He started to speak. Claire pointed without looking at him. "Bed 7. You are on that leg. Tourniquet if you cannot control it. Call ortho after." The surgeon blinked, then moved. A second surgeon stepped in behind him and looked at Claire with open disbelief. "Who is calling this?" Vega answered without looking up from her patient. "She is." The surgeon opened his mouth again, then saw the bay moving, saw patients stabilizing, saw the lack of time for pride. He shut it and went to work. Claire moved to the supply wall for one breath, grabbed more gauze, more tape, another chest tube set. Her hands did not shake. Her mind felt like a narrowed beam of light. Everything outside the work fell away. Then she smelled it again. Smoke, diesel, hot metal. For half a second, the hospital walls felt thinner. The bright lights felt harsher. The beeps sounded like they did in canvas tents with generators outside and sand in every crevice. Claire's throat tightened. She pressed her palm against the cold steel of the supply shelf, grounding herself. One breath in, one breath out. A nurse's voice pulled her back. "Bed 4 is dropping again." Claire turned and moved. Bed 4 was a middle-aged man with burns and a crushed forearm, but the bigger problem was his chest. His left side was rising wrong. His neck veins were standing out. "Tension," Claire said, and her voice did not waver. The nurse's eyes widened. Again, Claire confirmed. Needle, hiss, relief. The work kept going. Minutes passed in a way that did not feel like minutes. Time became a series of interventions. A tube placed, a bleeding controlled, an airway secured, a decision made. Somewhere in the middle of it, Kemp appeared at the doorway. He stood in his suit like a man who had walked into a fire wearing paper. His eyes took in the blood on the floor, the number of beds, the patients stacked into the hall, the staff moving too fast for decorum. His gaze landed on Claire. For a moment, his mouth tightened with the shape of a reprimand. Then a monitor screamed again, and a nurse shouted for help, and the reprimand died in his throat. Kemp stepped aside as another gurney came through. Claire saw him, registered him, and did not change her pace. Vega moved to Kemp with blood on her gloves. She did not touch him. She did not need to. "If you want to stop her," Vega said, voice low, "do it yourself. Stand in the middle of this and tell us to wait for paperwork." Kemp looked at the bay, looked at the faces, looked at the blood. He did not answer. Claire moved past him to the next patient. Her scrubs were streaked now. A smear of soot marked her forearm where she had steadied a burned man's shoulder. Her gloves were changed so often her wrists felt raw. The wave of arrivals slowed. The noise shifted from intake panic to sustained effort. Patients were transferred to imaging, to ICU, to OR as space opened by force and decision. A nurse approached Claire, breathing hard. "We stabilized 8. 2 went straight to OR. We lost 1. Claire's jaw tightened. She nodded once. "Document. Debrief. Later." The nurse blinked at the phrasing, then nodded and moved away, grateful for the sense that someone held the shape of the whole. In bed 3, Nolan finally handed off pressure to another surgeon and stepped back, arms shaking with fatigue. He peeled his gloves off and stared at the blood on his hands for a beat too long. Claire moved toward him, not soft, not harsh, just direct. "Wash," she said. Nolan looked up at her. His eyes were wide, exhausted, stripped of performance. "You should not have been here," he said, but the words had no bite left. Claire's voice was quiet. Neither should they. She nodded toward the bay, toward the patients who had arrived, broken and burning and bleeding. Nolan swallowed. "You saved them." Claire's gaze did not soften into comfort. "We saved some." Nolan flinched at the honesty, then nodded because he could not deny it. The trauma bay settled into a new rhythm. Not calm, but controlled. Beeps steadied into individual patterns. Suction slowed, voices lowered. Claire stood near the supply wall, again hands resting on the shelf, breathing through the lingering smell of smoke that clung to her clothes. Vega approached, mask pulled down, sweat at her temples, eyes sharp even in exhaustion. "You just took my bay," Vega said. Claire looked at her. "You let me?" Vega's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I did." Claire's chest rose and fell, controlled. They are going to come for me. Vega glanced toward the doorway where Kemp still hovered now on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. They can try. Claire's eyes narrowed. Do not make this a fight. Vega met her gaze. It already is. Claire looked back into the bay. Nurses cleaning blood from the floor. A resident rechecking an airway with hands steadier than they had been an hour ago. A surgeon tightening a dressing. A patient opening his eyes and blinking like he had returned from far away. Claire's hands flexed once open and closed, the same motion she had done in her car, in her apartment, in her sleep. She had not planned to be seen. She had not wanted to be. But the room had watched her anyway. The kind of watching that left marks. Claire turned her head slightly and caught Nolan looking at her again. Not with dismissal this time. With something else. Something that made his throat work as if he wanted to speak and did not know how. Claire looked away first. She did not need words to know what the bay now knew. The invisible hands were invisible no longer. Claire stayed near the supply wall, while the bay breathed itself back into something functional. The floor was still wet in places, streaked where mops had pushed diluted blood toward drains. Biohazard bins overflowed with gauze and gloves. The air held a stubborn layer of smoke that clung to hair and fabric. It sat in the back of the throat and refused to leave. A nurse leaned against the counter and laughed, once breathless and shaky. It was not humor. It was release. Vega moved through the room like a metronome, checking on patients, checking on staff, a glance here, a hand there. She did not praise. She did not scold. She kept the rhythm steady. Nolan stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing his hands as if the water could scrub away more than blood. His shoulders rose and fell too quickly. When he finished, he stared at his hands for a long second before drying them. Kemp hovered at the doorway with his phone. His tie was loosened now. The knot sat crooked, his collar damp with sweat. He looked like a man trying to decide which crisis belonged to him. He ended his call and stepped into the bay. He did not speak immediately. He took in the chest tubes, the dressings, the taped down lines. He watched a resident clamp a bleeding vessel with surprising steadiness. He watched a nurse adjust oxygen and speak to a patient in a low, soothing voice. Then his gaze landed on Claire. She met it without blinking. Kemp walked toward her, stopping at a careful distance. He glanced at her hands, at the blood smears on her sleeves, at the soot on her forearm. You were suspended, he said. Claire's voice was level. People were dying. Kemp's jaw tightened. He looked past her shoulder at the bay, as if asking the room for an answer he did not want. Vega stepped up beside Claire. Not in front of her. Beside. Kemp's eyes flicked to Vega. Doctor, this is not. Vega cut him off calm. Do not do this in here. Kemp looked at the staff around them. Too many ears. Too many eyes. He swallowed and lowered his voice. Conference room, he said. Now. Claire did not move. Vega did not move either. Kemp's face tightened further. He tried again, softer. Please. That word sounded foreign coming from him. Claire's gaze stayed on him. After the last transfer goes out. Kemp started to protest. Then a nurse called for help in the hallway, and Vega turned away, already moving. Kemp watched her go, then looked back at Claire as if the building itself had betrayed him. He exhaled once and stepped aside. Claire returned to the work. Not dramatic, just necessary. She helped tape down a line. She lifted a patient's chin and checked airway positioning. She held pressure on a bleeding site while a nurse changed dressings. She pointed to a chart on a clipboard and told a resident to verify a medication dose. The resident nodded and did it without argument. The bay was still chaos, but it was organized chaos now. Patients moved out in waves. ICU took 2, OR took 3, imaging took 4. The hallway cleared one gurney at a time. When the last transfer rolled out, the doors swung closed and the noise dropped, by half leaving behind the steady hum of vents and the softer beep of stabilizing monitors. Claire peeled off her gloves and dropped them into the bin. She flexed her fingers once, then let them rest at her sides. Kemp waited near the entrance, like a man guarding a boundary. Nolan stood a few feet behind him, uncertain as if he had been summoned, and regretted showing up. Vega remained in the bay, speaking quietly to a nurse finishing one last check. Kemp gestured toward the hallway. Now. Claire followed without a word. They walked in silence past the nurse's station. Conversations stopped as they passed. A few people tried not to stare. A few did not try. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and marker ink. A pitcher of water sat in the center of the long table untouched. Kemp took the head seat. Nolan sat to the side, posture stiff. Vega leaned against the wall near the window, arms folded, eyes steady. Claire sat at the opposite end. She placed her hands on the table, palms down, and waited. Kemp spoke first, voice controlled. You exceeded your role again. Claire held his gaze. I kept people alive. Kemp's mouth tightened. That is not the discussion. Vega's voice was quiet but sharp. It is the only discussion that matters. Kemp looked at her. Doctor, you are making this harder. Vega did not blink. Good. Kemp's eyes returned to Claire. Risk management is already involved. Counsel is already involved. The board will want an explanation. Claire's voice stayed flat. Tell them the truth. We had a mass casualty. We were short. I worked. Kemp shook his head. You performed interventions. You gave orders. Claire's jaw tightened. Because the bay was freezing. Nolan shifted in his chair. He looked at Claire, then at Kemp, then at Vega. His voice came out low. She was right. Kemp stared at him. Excuse me. Nolan swallowed. I froze for a second. She moved. People followed. We stabilized more than we would have. The words cost him. It showed in his face. Kemp's nostrils flared. This is not a hero story. Claire's eyes narrowed. Then stop trying to make it a crime story. The room went still. Kemp's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Then he silenced it and looked back up. Security notified me that a helicopter is inbound, he said. His tone was irritated, like he was offended by the disruption. We do not have a scheduled medevac. Vega's brow furrowed. Weather is bad. Why would a helicopter come now? Kemp's phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Yes, this is Kemp. He listened. His face changed. The irritation drained out, replaced by caution. Yes, understood. I will send someone. He ended the call and looked at them. A military officer is in the lobby. He is asking for someone named Claire Mercer. Claire's stomach tightened so fast, it felt like a hand closing around her ribs. She kept her face still. Vega's eyes sharpened. Nolan sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Kemp watched Claire. Do you know him? Claire's voice came out quiet. Maybe. Kemp stood. He is coming back here. Vega pushed off the wall. Then we should meet him somewhere else. Kemp hesitated, while Vega's gaze held his. Because you do not want this conversation in front of staff. Kemp's jaw worked, then he nodded once. Fine. Admin office. Claire stood. Her hands stayed steady, but she could feel the heat rising behind her sternum. Again, the same pressure she had felt in Pacu in the bay in her apartment. The difference was this pressure had a name. They walked down the corridor toward the administrative suite. The hospital felt quieter now, like it was holding its breath, again not for trauma this time, but for something more personal. The admin office was too clean, too polished. A wall of framed certifications, a long credenza with plaques, a faint scent of cologne that did not belong in a hospital. Kemp opened the door and stepped inside. Vega followed. Nolan hovered at the threshold. Claire stepped in last. A man stood near the window, back straight, hands clasped behind him. He wore a dark uniform with crisp lines, the kind that looked untouched by the mess of the trauma bay. His hair was cut short, precise. His face held the weathered calm of someone who had spent years in rooms where panic was not useful. He turned when Claire entered. His eyes locked on her like he had found a target. Specialist Mercer, he said. Claire's throat tightened. Whoa. She forced air in. That is not my rank. The man's expression barely changed. Lieutenant Colonel Grant Harker, Medical Corps. Nolan stepped inside without meaning to. Who the hell are you? Harker glanced at him once, then looked back at Claire. I am the person who has been trying to find you for 18 months. Claire's jaw clenched. You found me. Harker nodded. I did. Kemp cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control. Lieutenant Colonel, this is a civilian hospital. You cannot just walk in and request staff. Harker turned his attention to Kemp, polite but unmoved. I am not requesting staff. I am requesting a person. Kemp's mouth tightened. For what purpose? Harker did not look away from Kemp as he spoke. We have a situation developing across county lines. A severe wind event. Widespread damage, power loss, structural collapse. The state fairgrounds are being converted into a temporary medical facility. We need trauma intake and surgical coordination. Kemp blinked. Why are you asking for her? Harker's gaze returned to Claire. Because she is the best combat surgical specialist I have ever worked with. The words landed like a weight on the air. Nolan stared at Claire, shock plain on his face. Vega's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened in a way that said she was taking every word and filing it away. Kemp shifted uneasy. Ms. Mercer is a surgical technician here. Harker's mouth twitched the smallest hint of something like humor. I watched the feed from your trauma bay. Your security cameras record more than you think. Kemp stiffened. You accessed our security. Harker cut him off, still polite. The city asked for assistance. We coordinated with emergency management. Your trauma bay became part of that picture when the paper mill exploded. He looked back at Claire. You ran triage like you were born in it. Claire's voice was tight. You are not here to compliment me. Harker stepped closer, stopping a careful distance away. His voice lowered, less formal. I am here because the fairgrounds unit is going live in 6 hours, and we will be drowning. I need someone who can keep it from becoming a graveyard. Claire's hands curled once at her sides, then released. Find someone else. Harker held her gaze. There is no one else with your combination of speed, judgment, and calm under pressure. Claire's jaw tightened. Do not say calm. Harker's eyes did not soften. Fine. Your control. Vega spoke for the first time, quiet and firm. How many patients? Harker turned toward her. Initial estimates are 30 critical and rising. We will also be receiving transfers from smaller facilities that lost power. Vega's expression tightened. In staffing. Harker's gaze returned to Claire. Thin. We are building a team. We can bring surgeons, nurses, medics. What we need is coordination. Nolan's voice came out hoarse. This is insane. Harker looked at him as if noticing him properly for the first time. Doctor? Nolan Price. Nolan said, defensive. Attending surgeon. Harker nodded once, not impressed, not dismissive. You did good work tonight. Nolan blinked, thrown by the unexpected acknowledgement. Harker continued, but you froze. That happens to smart people when the room gets too big. Someone made it smaller for you. Nolan's face flushed. He looked down. Claire's voice cut in, controlled. I am not going. Harker watched her. Because you do not want to. Claire's throat tightened. Because I left for a reason. Harker nodded once. I know your reason. Claire's eyes narrowed. You do not get to own my reason. Harker's voice stayed steady. I do not, but I can respect it and still ask. Kemp stepped in, eager to find ground. Lieutenant Colonel, she is currently under investigation for scope of practice issues. This hospital cannot release her to participate in outside operations. Harker's gaze shifted to Kemp, calm and sharp. Then call it a volunteer deployment under state emergency authorization. Or call it a consultancy. Or call it whatever paper makes you feel safe. People are going to die in a converted fairground if the right people are not there. Kemp's mouth tightened. You cannot pressure me into liability. Harker's voice remained even. I am not pressuring you. I am describing reality. Vega looked at Kemp. Harold, listen to him. Kemp's eyes flicked between them. He looked like a man watching control slip through his fingers. Claire spoke again, quieter now, but firm. I will not go alone. Harker's eyes stayed on her. Name what you need. Claire took a breath. The air in the office felt too clean, too controlled, too far from blood and smoke. She forced herself to speak in practical terms. A team that listens, authority to run triage, supplies that do not get locked behind paperwork while people bleed. Harker nodded once. You will have all of that. Claire's jaw tightened, and a hard stop. Harker's brow rose slightly. Define it. 30 days, Claire said. Kemp's eyes widened. 30 days. Claire ignored him. Then I am done. Harker held her gaze. 30 days? Vega watched Claire with something like approval and worry mixed together. Nolan looked like he wanted to object and could not find the moral ground to stand on. Claire exhaled slowly. I am not re-enlisting. Harker's voice stayed calm. I am not asking you to. Claire studied him, searching for the catch. There was always a catch. Harker's expression did not flinch. This is not about uniform. It is about bodies on tables. Claire's throat tightened. She looked toward Vega, then toward Nolan. Vega's eyes were steady. If you go with control, do not let them drag you. Nolan's mouth opened, then shut. He swallowed, then spoke, voice low. If you can do what you did tonight, their people will live. Claire held his gaze for a beat, then looked away. Hearing it from him felt strange. It was not apology, not yet. It was acknowledgement, and it landed heavier than she expected. Claire looked back at Harker. I need written terms. Harker nodded. You will have them. Claire's hands flexed once at her sides, then settled. She felt the decision settle in her bones, not like peace, but like commitment. Fine, Claire said. 30 days, Kemp let out a breath like he had been holding it. This is highly irregular. Vega's tone was dry. Tonight was highly irregular. Harker stepped back, giving Claire space. We leave at dawn. Claire's eyes narrowed. Do not give me a schedule like I work for you. Harker's mouth twitched almost a smile. Then meet me at the parking lot at 7:30. If you are not there, I will move on. Claire held his gaze. You will not move on. You said there is no one else. Harker did not argue. 7:30. He turned to Kemp, businesslike again. I will send the authorization paperwork within the hour. Kemp looked like he wanted to argue, then saw Vega's face and stopped. Harker turned back to Claire. Bring what you need. Claire's voice was quiet. I travel light. Harker nodded once as if he already knew. He left the office with the same straight posture he arrived with. His footsteps were measured, controlled. A man who had built his life around decisions. The door closed. Silence filled the room. Kemp rubbed his forehead, exhausted. We will revisit your employment status when this emergency is over. Claire did not answer him. Vega stepped closer to Claire, lowering her voice. Are you sure? Claire's jaw tightened. No. Vega nodded once. Good. Nolan shifted, restless. He looked like he wanted to say something, then did not trust his own words. Claire did not give him an opening. She turned and walked out of the admin office. The corridor felt too bright, too ordinary. The hospital smelled like disinfectant again instead of smoke, as if trying to pretend the night had not happened. Claire walked without stopping, past staff who watched her in silence, past the elevators, past the trauma bay doors, now closed. At the employee entrance, cold air seeped in around the frame. She pushed through and stepped into the night. The wind off Superior hit her face. She pulled her hood up and walked to her car. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel this time. The decision sat with her like a second heartbeat. She drove home through dark streets, the lake a black presence to her right. At her apartment, she opened the drawer and pulled out the brown envelope again. Discharge papers, the old photo, the bronze medal. She did not look at the medal. She placed the envelope into her bag anyway. Then she moved to her closet and pulled out a duffel. Simple, scuffed, light. She packed in silence. 2 changes of clothes, toiletries, a pair of gloves she did not need to bring but brought anyway, a small notebook, a pen. She zipped the bag and set it by the door. Only then did she sit at the edge of her bed and let herself breathe. Not calm, controlled. She stared at her hands in the dim light, then stood and washed them once more, slow and methodical, until the water ran clear over skin that had held too many lives. After she turned off the lights and lay down fully dressed, eyes open, listening to the radiator tick and the wind press against the window. When sleep finally came, it came thin. But it came, and in the morning Claire woke before her alarm sat up and reached for the duffel without hesitation. Claire woke before her alarm sat up and reached for the duffel without hesitation. The morning was still dark, Duluth wrapped in cold that made every sound sharper. She dressed without thinking. Jeans, thermal shirt, a plain jacket, hair pulled back tight. She checked her phone once. No messages, no updates. That almost felt worse than bad news. Outside, the wind off Superior pushed at her as she walked to the car. The sky held a thin gray line at the horizon, the lake a darker strip beneath it. Her breath came out in white bursts. The duffel sat heavy in the passenger seat, not because it weighed much, but because it meant she was leaving the quiet she had built. At 7:28, she pulled into the employee lot at Lakeview General. Harker's black SUV waited near the far edge engine, running headlights cutting through drifting snow. He stood outside collar, up hands in his pockets. He looked up when she approached and nodded once like this was a meeting he expected to happen. "You came," he said. Claire stopped a few feet away. "I said 30 days. I did not say I would be early." Harker's mouth twitched, almost amusement. Early keeps people alive. Claire did not answer. She opened the back door and tossed her duffel in. Harker took the driver's seat. Claire climbed into the passenger side. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cold metal. They pulled out onto the road, tires crunching on packed snow. For a few miles, neither spoke. The city slid past in dim morning light. Dark houses, bare trees, a gas station with one pump lit like a lonely stage. Claire watched everything as if she might need to remember it, like normal life was something you borrowed and returned. Harker drove with steady hands. After a while, he spoke without turning his head. "I read the incident report from last night." Claire stared out the window. "Which one? The tube or the bay?" "All of it," he said. "You ran the room." Claire's jaw tightened. "The room ran because people worked." Harker's voice stayed calm. "You know what I mean." Claire did not argue. Arguing wasted oxygen. They crossed the bridge toward the fairgrounds. The closer they got, the more obvious the damage became. Streetlights out, fallen branches, a stop sign bent at an angle like it had been punched. A line of cars at an intersection where police waved traffic through because signals were dead. When they reached the fairgrounds, the place looked wrong. Normally it held rides, food stalls, music families. Now it was a patchwork of tents, portable lights, generators, and National Guard trucks. The big exhibition hall had its doors thrown open. Inside, bright work lights turned concrete into a pale slab. Rows of cots filled the space. Pallets of supplies sat stacked against walls. The hum of generators pressed into everything constant and low. Claire stepped out of the SUV and the smell hit her first. Diesel. Not faint, not distant. Thick in the air, mixed with antiseptic and cold sweat and the metallic note of blood. Her breath caught for half a second. The world tilted just slightly, as if the floor under her boots tried to become something else. She forced air in through her nose, forced it out slowly. She looked down at her hands, flexed her fingers once, then let them settle. "You good?" Harker asked. Claire nodded without looking at him. "I am here." A young captain approached at a quick walk, tablet in hand, eyes sharp and tired. "Colonel," she said to Harker, then looked at Claire. "Ma'am, we have 32, critical 15 stable. Intake is backed up. We have one operating station running, and a second setup is delayed because the generator for that side is unstable." Harker gestured to Claire. "This is Claire Mercer. She will run trauma intake and coordinate flow to surgery." The captain did not blink. No surprise, no judgment, just immediate acceptance. "Yes, ma'am." Claire looked past her to the layout. Triage stations near the entrance. a bottleneck of stretchers waiting for assessment, a supply line running too long from storage to intake, a crash cart parked too far from where people were stacking. She pointed without hesitation. Move the crash cart closer. Put a second airway cart at the entrance. I want a whiteboard by triage with patient numbers and status, big enough to see across the room. The captain's fingers moved on the tablet. Copy. And that generator issue, Claire continued. If O2 cannot run, we need a manual plan. Make sure we have extra suction canisters and portable oxygen. Do not let one failure shut down the whole side. Yes, ma'am. Claire started walking. The captain and Harker followed. As she moved through the hall, she scanned like she was reading a map, where people clustered, where nurses had to weave through traffic, where supplies were being carried one by one instead of in batches. The flow was too slow, the line was too long, the room would drown if it stayed like this. She stopped near intake. A woman lay on a cot mid-30s, face pale eyes too bright. Her lower leg was wrapped in thick bandages, already soaking through. A nurse sat beside her, holding her hand. Claire knelt. Her knees creaked in the cold. What's your name? She asked. The woman swallowed. Sarah. Claire nodded. Sarah, I'm Claire. Look at me. Sarah's eyes flicked to Claire's face and held there, desperate. Your breathing is good, Claire said. Keep it slow. In, out. Sarah tried. It hurts, Sarah whispered. I know, Claire said. She did not pretend it did not. She looked at the leg, the angle wrong under blankets. A crush injury. Vascular risk. Am I going to lose it? Sarah asked. Voice thin. Claire held her gaze. I do not know yet, but we are going to do everything we can. Sarah's eyes filled. She nodded once like she understood the honesty more than reassurance. Claire stood and looked at the nurse. Keep her warm. Pain control when you can. Notify me the moment O2 is ready. The nurse nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Claire turned back to the captain. She needs priority. If vascular is compromised, we lose time fast. The captain marked it down. Harker watched Claire work silent. There was no praise in his eyes, just recognition like he was watching someone step back into a shape they had once lived inside. The first hour disappeared into movement. Claire took position at triage. She did not stand behind a desk. She stood where she could see the entrance and the beds and the path between. She listened to each handoff with her whole body. She asked short questions: mechanism, time, airway, breathing, circulation, mental status. She assigned tags with a marker on tape, fast and visible. She pushed decisions into motion without apology. A patient with an altered mental state and a scalp laceration tried to sit up and pull his oxygen off. Claire leaned in, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke low. Stay with me. Keep it on. I need you to breathe for me. He blinked, then obeyed. A child arrived, coughing, face streaked with soot. The mother was shaking so hard she could barely speak. Claire crouched to the child's level, checked the lips, listened to the chest. Airway is open, Claire said to the respiratory therapist. Nebulizer and monitor. Keep them together. The mother's eyes snapped to Claire. Is he going to be okay? Claire looked at her. Right now he is breathing. We will keep it that way. The mother nodded, clinging to the child's hand. A man with a deep laceration across his thigh arrived, pale and sweating. Blood pooled under the makeshift dressing. Tourniquet, Claire said, and a medic hesitated. The medic said, we can pressure it. Claire's gaze locked on him. Pressure is failing. Do it. He did. The bleeding slowed. The man's eyes rolled back. His pulse steadied. Claire did not look relieved. Relief was a luxury that made hands slow. At 9:04, Nolan Price appeared at the edge of intake, wearing a borrowed jacket over scrubs, hair still damp from a rushed shower. His eyes were red-rimmed like he had slept in pieces. He carried a small bag of his own, and he looked like someone who had stepped into a world he did not understand. He stood for a beat, watching the room, watching Claire. Then he walked to her. You came, Claire said, not looking at him. Nolan cleared his throat. I volunteered. Claire's eyes flicked to his hands. No tremor. That was something. You do not have to prove anything, she said. Nolan's jaw tightened. I am not proving. I am helping. Claire nodded once. Good. You are on surgery coordination. That station needs a lead who can say no. Nolan blinked. Say no. Yes, Claire said. If you do not say no to the wrong cases, the right cases die waiting. His throat worked. He nodded. Understood. A medic approached with a clipboard. Ma'am, we have 2 patients with abdominal trauma waiting. 1 hypotensive, 1 stable. Claire turned. Bring the hypotensive to the front. Stable stays monitored. If he changes, you tell me, not the clipboard. The medic nodded and ran. Nolan watched the exchange, then looked at Claire. How do you decide that fast? Claire did not stop moving. I decide with what I have. Then I reevaluate. He followed her, keeping pace. And when you are wrong. Claire glanced at him. Then you correct before the mistake becomes a funeral. Nolan swallowed. He did not argue. By late morning, the rhythm began to form. Not calm, but patterned. Intake assessed, airway stabilized, bleeding controlled, pain treated. Patients moved to surgery or held for observation with clear triggers for escalation. Claire wrote triggers on the whiteboard in thick marker: falling pressure, rising heart rate, altered mental status, increasing work of breathing. She put the words where everyone could see them, then repeated them out loud until the room echoed them back. A resident stepped toward her, young, anxious eyes wide. "Dr. Mercer," he started. Claire held up a hand. "Just Claire." The resident swallowed. "Claire, we have limited supplies for vascular repair. We are going to run out of sutures." Claire looked at the supply crates, then at the patient list. "Show me what you have." He led her to a table where open packs lay like evidence. Claire scanned, then pointed. "We can improvise temporary control with what we have," she said. "Then definitive repair when the supply line catches up." The resident stared. "How?" Claire picked up a staple gun from an ortho kit, then set it down. "Not here. Not like that. But we can create time." The resident's eyes widened, half fear, half fascination. Claire met his gaze. "Time is what we are buying all day." He nodded slowly. At noon, a generator sputtered on the far side. The lights flickered. The hum dipped, then returned. People froze for half a second, the way they always did when power threatened to vanish. Claire raised her voice just enough. "Keep moving. If lights go out, you use headlamps. If suction fails, you hand suction. If monitors fail, you use hands and eyes." The room did not relax, but it resumed motion. Her words were not reassurance. They were instruction. Instruction gave people something to hold. Later, she found Nolan at the surgical station, sleeves rolled up, face drawn. He was closing a vascular repair with a focus that looked different from yesterday. Less performance, more listening. Claire watched his hands for a beat. He adjusted a retractor angle, and the field cleared just enough. He looked up and caught her watching. "I did what you said," Nolan murmured. Claire stepped closer. "What did I say?" "Say no," he replied. Claire nodded. "And?" Nolan's gaze dropped to the patient. "I sent one to observation instead of rushing to surgery. It felt wrong." Claire's voice stayed even. "And now?" Nolan's jaw worked. "Now I think it was right." His pressure stabilized. He did not need a table. Claire held his gaze. "Good." He hesitated. "How do you not second-guess every choice?" Claire looked toward intake, where a nurse was taping a name tag to a patient's gown. "I do second-guess. I just do it while my hands keep working." Nolan nodded once, absorbing it. The afternoon wore on. Patients continued to arrive, fewer than the first wave, but steady. The fairgrounds unit began to feel less like a frantic improvisation and more like a machine being assembled while it ran. At 5:19, Sarah's bed rolled into O2. Claire stood near the entrance, watching as the team prepared. The surgeon assigned to the case was older hands, steady eyes, tired. He glanced at Claire. "We can try to save it," he said. Claire nodded. "Try." He studied her face, then looked away as if he had heard something about her, but decided it did not matter. Claire stepped back and let the team work. For the first time that day, she walked outside for a moment. The sky was turning bruised purple over the fairgrounds. Cold air hit her lungs cleanly. The smell of diesel was still there, but thinner, diluted by wind. She stood with her hands in her jacket pockets and breathed. Harker approached quietly, stopping beside her without crowding. "Intake is flowing," he said. Claire kept her eyes on the horizon. "It can always flow better." Harker's voice was calm. "You are doing it." Claire's jaw tightened. "We are doing it." Harker let the correction sit. "How long do you want to stay out here?" Claire glanced at him. "Long enough to remember I'm not made of steel." Harker nodded once, then go back in. Claire exhaled slowly and turned toward the hall doors. The generator hum met her again as she stepped inside. The whiteboard was full of names and numbers and arrows. The beeps were steady in places, frantic in others. She walked back into intake sleeves, pushed up hands ready, and took her position like it was the only place she could stand without falling. Daylight faded outside the exhibition hall, but inside the fairgrounds unit, the lights held bright and unforgiving. The generator hum stayed constant, a low vibration you could feel in your teeth. The whiteboard near triage filled and refilled. Names replaced by numbers, numbers replaced by statuses. Red to OR, yellow to hold, green to discharge with instructions that mattered. Claire's voice carried across intake in short phrases. Clear, unadorned, a question, an order, a confirmation. Her tone never rose into panic. It did not need to. The room followed the tempo she set. By midnight, the flow slowed, not stopped, just slowed enough to feel the difference in the air. Nurses leaned against counters for a second before pushing off again. Medics swapped out with fresh teams. Coffee appeared in paper cups that cooled before anyone remembered to drink. Nolan came to her with a clipboard, eyes tired but focused. We have 5 waiting for imaging, he said. 2 can go in the morning if stable. 1 needs a CT now. Claire scanned the list without taking it from him. Which one is compensating? Nolan pointed. This one. Abdominal bruising. Pressure stable, but pulse is climbing. Claire's gaze sharpened. He is not stable. He is polite. Move him up. Nolan nodded and turned to do it, no argument, no pride. He stopped, then looked back at her. Thank you, he said quietly. Claire did not soften. She did not need to. Keep moving. He did. At 2:17 a.m., Sarah came out of surgery. The surgeon met Claire at intake mask down, face drawn. Leg is still attached, he said. Claire felt something loosen behind her ribs, not relief exactly, more like permission to breathe. She nodded once. Good. The surgeon hesitated. Vascular was compromised. We bypassed and stabilized. If infection hits, we fight it. Claire held his gaze. We fight it. He nodded, then walked away. Claire found the nurse who had been with Sarah earlier. Tell her when she wakes, Claire said. Tell her we did everything we could. The nurse's eyes shone. Yes, ma'am. Claire turned back to the board and wrote one word beside Sarah's number. Alive. The marker squeaked faintly against the surface. Small sound, huge meaning. The next morning, state officials arrived in clean jackets and crisp boots, faces too smooth for the work. They asked for briefings. They asked for numbers. They asked for assurance. Harker handled them with quiet authority, giving facts without giving vulnerability. Claire stayed in the background during those conversations, not hiding, simply refusing the spotlight when it did not help the people on cots. She moved through intake, checking supplies, checking staff, correcting small inefficiencies that became big problems under pressure. She caught a resident tying a knot too loose and tightened it without commentary. She nudged a crash cart closer to the entrance and watched response times shift by seconds. Seconds were everything. Days blended. By day 7, the fairgrounds unit ran like a machine that had learned itself. The intake bottleneck was gone. The supply line shortened. The second operating station ran steadily. Staff rotated without collapse. The whiteboard stayed full, but the movement across it looked less desperate and more deliberate. Claire noticed the difference in the beeps. Fewer alarms, more steady rhythms, more lives not teetering. She noticed it in people too. A nurse who had once looked at her with fear now moved with a calm that held. A resident who had shaken during a tube placement now steadied his hands by breathing first, then acting. A medic who argued about a tourniquet now placed one without hesitation when the blood demanded it. The work was still brutal. It just stopped being chaotic. On the night of day 12, Vega arrived. Not in uniform, not with a dramatic entrance. She came in driving a hospital van loaded with supplies and staff eyes tired but sharp. She stepped into the exhibition hall and looked around like she was assessing a battlefield. Her gaze landed on Claire, near intake hands, mid-motion, directing a transfer, adjusting a collar, checking a monitor. Vega walked to her and stopped at a careful distance. You look like you belong here, Vega said. Claire did not look up at first. She finished taping a dressing, then stood and faced Vega. I used to, Claire replied. Vega's mouth twitched. You still do. Claire's jaw tightened. That is not comforting. Vega nodded. It is not meant to be. They stood for a beat, the hum of generators and voices surrounding them. Vega glanced toward Nolan at the surgical station, speaking to a resident with measured focus. Price stayed. Claire looked in the same direction. He came on his own. Vega's eyes narrowed. He is learning. Claire's voice stayed neutral. He is trying. Vega studied Claire's face. That is more than most. Claire did not respond. She turned back to the board. Vega stepped closer. I brought supplies, chest tubes, sutures, blood warmers, also a transport list from Lakeview. We are sending resources and rotating staff. Kemp finally stopped pretending this was optional. Claire's eyes flicked to Vega. He did not stop. He just lost the argument. Vega's expression softened slightly. Sometimes that is enough. Claire looked down at her hands, then back to the board. She spoke without looking at Vega. How is the hospital? Vega's voice was careful, different. People keep glancing at Pacu like it might bite them. Claire's throat tightened, and Kemp. Vega paused. He is angry. He is also quieter. The board is watching metrics. They like numbers. Your absence made the numbers worse in some places. Claire's jaw clenched. Good. Vega's gaze sharpened. Do not say that like you want them to suffer. Claire's voice dropped. I want them to understand. Vega held her eyes. They are starting to. A patient's monitor alarmed near intake. Claire turned and moved. Vega followed without asking. They worked side by side for the next hour, not as doctor and tech, not as supervisor and subordinate, but as two people who understood that competence mattered more than labels when the room was burning. Later, Claire found herself at a supply table, cleaning her hands with sanitizer, the alcohol bite cutting through the smell of diesel. Nolan approached with 2 paper cups of coffee, both steaming. You need this, he said, setting one down near her. Claire did not take it immediately. You do not have to babysit me. Nolan's mouth tightened. I am not. I am trying to be useful. Claire's eyes met his, then be useful. Nolan nodded once. He pointed toward the whiteboard. We are down to 12 critical, 14 stable, the rest are discharging. Claire's gaze stayed on him. And the ones you sent to observation? Nolan's shoulders rose slightly. 2 deteriorated. We caught it early. 1 went to surgery in time. Claire nodded. Good. Nolan hesitated. I would have missed it before. Claire's tone stayed flat. You did not miss it now. Nolan swallowed. Because you taught me what to see. Claire's chest tightened at the word taught. It felt too heavy, too final. She picked up the coffee, took a sip, and let the heat move through her, simple and grounding. Do not make it bigger than it is. Nolan's eyes held hers. It is big. Claire set the cup down. Then prove it by doing it when I'm not standing here. Nolan nodded, jaw set. I will. When the mission ended on day 30, there was no celebration. There was dismantling. Cots folded, crates sealed. Lights turned off in sections as patient load transferred back to hospitals with power and walls. The exhibition hall looked slowly less like an emergency room and more like a cavern returning to emptiness. Claire stood near the entrance and watched the last critical transfer roll out. The stretcher wheels squeaked against concrete. The sound echoed longer now, not swallowed by crowd noise. Harker approached, hands in pockets, his uniform jacket zipped to the neck against the cold that seeped in. Ready, he asked. Claire nodded once. We are done. Harker's eyes stayed on her. You did what you said? 30 days. Claire breathed out slowly. Yes. He studied her face. You could stay. Claire did not look away. No. Harker nodded as if he expected that answer. You are not hiding anymore, though. Claire's jaw tightened. Do not confuse being seen with being healed. Harker's mouth twitched. Fair. He held out a hand. Claire stared at it for a beat, then shook it. His grip was firm and brief. Take care of yourself, Harker said. Claire's voice was quiet. You too. He walked away toward a line of vehicles waiting near the far end of the grounds. Vega pulled up in the Lakeview van as the final crates were loaded. Nolan sat in the passenger seat, face-tired, eyes alert. When he saw Claire, he shifted as if unsure whether to speak. Vega leaned out the driver window. You coming? Claire lifted her duffel and climbed into the back without answering. Inside, the van smelled like hospital linen and hand sanitizer. Familiar. Safer than diesel. They drove back toward Duluth under a pale sky. No one talked much. The kind of exhaustion that followed work like this did not leave room for speeches. It left room for small truths. A sigh, a glance, a hand wrapped around a coffee cup. When Lakeview General came into view, the building looked the same. A block of light and glass against gray winter. But Claire felt the difference before she stepped inside. The weight in her chest shifted, not lighter, just changed. Vega parked near the employee entrance. Kemp wants a meeting, she said, eyes forward. Claire's throat tightened. Of course he does. Nolan glanced back at Claire through the gap between seats. They are talking about you, he said. Claire did not answer. Vega opened her door. Cold air rushed in. Come on, she said. We have work to do. Claire stepped out, duffel on her shoulder, and walked toward the doors. Inside the hallway smelled like disinfectant and coffee, and something else faint but real. Attention. Heads turned. People watched her pass. Some nodded, some looked away. No one laughed. No one whispered loudly this time. The silence held a different kind of respect, the kind you earn with blood on your sleeves. Claire kept moving posture, steady hands at her sides. She did not know what to do with being seen, so she did what she always did. She walked toward the conference room and let the next room tell her what it wanted. The conference room at Lakeview General looked the same as it always had. Glass walls, long table, a pitcher of water that no one drank. The difference was the people inside. Harold Kemp sat at the head tie, straight again, posture rigid. 2 board members sat along one side, faces composed, eyes alert. Dr. Evelyn Sloan stood near the window in a tailored suit that looked out of place in a hospital that smelled like disinfectant and coffee. She had the calm of someone used to making decisions with consequences. Vega sat to Claire's right. Nolan sat to Claire's left shoulder, squared hands clasped tight on the table as if he was holding himself in place. Claire took the chair opposite Kemp and set her duffel on the floor. She rested her hands on the table palms down steady. Kemp cleared his throat. Ms. Mercer. Claire looked at him. Mr. Kemp. Sloan stepped forward. Claire Mercer. Claire's eyes shifted to her. I am Dr. Evelyn Sloan, Sloan said. Chief of Surgery. Claire nodded once. I have heard. Sloan's mouth twitched slightly. Most people have. Kemp opened a folder. We have reviewed your service verification. We have reviewed the reports from the Fairgrounds unit. We have reviewed the incident in PACU. Claire's jaw tightened. She did not speak. Kemp continued, "You performed outside your hired scope." Claire held his gaze. "Yes." Sloan leaned in slightly. "You also saved a life in PACU. You coordinated mass casualty flow at the fairgrounds. You reduced preventable deterioration by changing how people watched and reacted." Claire's throat tightened. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up. "People did their jobs." Vega's voice was quiet. "Because you showed them how." Claire did not respond. Kemp slid a document across the table. "This hospital cannot ignore licensure requirements. We also cannot ignore outcomes." Claire stared at the paper without touching it. Sloan spoke measured. "We are offering you a position? Director of Trauma Education?" Claire blinked once. The phrase did not land immediately, like her mind refused to accept it on first contact. Kemp added senior clinical consultant on complex trauma cases within defined parameters. Claire looked at the paper now, lines of text, titles, responsibilities, a salary that looked like it belonged to someone else. "I do not have a medical degree," Claire said. Sloan nodded. "You have training and experience that most of our staff will never see. We can build a pathway. An accelerated certification and credentialing program with defined oversight. Legal is drafting it. Risk is drafting it. I am signing it." Kemp's mouth tightened, but he did not object. Claire's gaze shifted to Vega. Vega looked back steady. Nolan cleared his throat. His voice was low, rough. "We almost lost a patient because I did not see what you saw." Kemp glanced at him sharply. Nolan did not stop. "We did not lose him because she spoke. Then she acted. And at the fairgrounds, we saved people because she made decisions while the rest of us were still trying to be perfect." Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do not turn me into a story." Nolan swallowed. "I am not. I am admitting I was wrong." Silence filled the room for a beat. The distant sound of a monitor beeped somewhere outside, steady and patient. Sloan slid a pen across the table. "You can say no." Claire stared at the pen. Her wrist itched under her sleeve, a familiar pull. Vega spoke softly, not persuading, just stating. "If you want to make sure no one freezes the way we froze, this is how." Claire looked at the document again. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Words about curriculum, protocol development, simulation, consultation, teaching. She felt the resistance rise in her chest, sharp and immediate, like stepping into diesel smell again. Then she felt something else underneath it, quieter, but stronger. She picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. Claire signed. Kemp exhaled, the sound restrained. "We will begin onboarding immediately." Sloane's expression softened slightly. "Welcome." Claire set the pen down and stood. "I need to work." Sloan nodded. "So no, sir, you will." A week later, her office was small. A desk, a chair, a window that looked out over the employee parking lot where snow piles shrank slowly with passing days. A shelf that was empty until she put something on it. Claire opened a cardboard box and took out a few books. Trauma references, a binder, a coffee mug someone had placed inside without asking. It was plain white, no slogan, just a mug. At the bottom of the box was the photo. 5 people in dusty uniforms, faces sunburned, grinning at a camera that had no business being there. Claire held it for a moment, then set it on the desk facing her. She did not say anything to it. She did not need to. A knock sounded at the open door. Claire looked up. A young resident stood there, hair still damp from a rushed shower badge, new eyes nervous. "Dr. Mercer," he began. Claire lifted a hand. "Just Claire." He swallowed. "I am Ethan Rafiq, starting trauma rotation." Claire nodded once. "Sit." He stepped in and sat on the chair across from her desk like he was waiting for a verdict. He hesitated. "I heard you worked in combat zones." Claire studied his face. Too young, too earnest, too full of fear disguised as ambition. She recognized it. "I worked in bad places," she said. Ethan's hands tightened on his knees. "Can you teach me?" Claire looked at him for a long beat. She could have said no. She could have kept the door closed and stayed safer. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. "Yes," she said, "but you are going to listen." Ethan nodded quickly. "Yes." Claire wrote 3 words at the top of the paper. Airway, breathing, circulation. She slid the paper toward him. "Start there." 2 weeks later, the trauma simulation lab smelled like new plastic and disinfectant. The room was bright, too clean, and that was the point. A safe place to learn to move fast. A mannequin lay on the table chest, rising and falling with a machine rhythm. A monitor displayed a heart rate that climbed a blood pressure that dropped an oxygen saturation that wavered. 10 residents stood around the table in a semicircle, clipboards in hand, trying not to look like they were trying. Claire stood at the foot of the table, sleeves rolled up, hair tight, voice calm. "You have a patient with tension pneumothorax," she said. "Pressure is dropping. You have minutes." Ethan stepped forward, hands shaking slightly. Claire watched him, expression unreadable. He picked up a needle and hovered over the mannequin's chest, searching for certainty. Claire spoke softly. Breathe. He inhaled, exhaled. Use your hands, Claire said. Find the landmarks. Ethan pressed, found the space, then inserted the needle. A hiss played through the simulator speaker. The monitor numbers stabilized. Ethan's shoulders dropped, like he had been carrying weight he did not know he had. Claire nodded once. Good, now finish it. He reached for the chest tube, kit hands steadier, now movements more deliberate. He made the incision. He dissected. He placed the tube. The monitor settled into a steady rhythm. The beep sounded simple again. Claire stepped closer and looked around the semicircle of faces. Some were fascinated. Some were terrified. All of them were paying attention. Decisive, Claire said. Not reckless. You do not wait for perfect when someone is dying. No one spoke. Pens moved across paper. A month later, the trauma bay at Lakeview General filled with the familiar noise of a real case. A car accident victim, young woman, internal bleeding pressure, dropping in fast steps. Nolan stood at the bedside, lead surgeon, eyes focused, voice tight. I cannot find the source. Claire stepped to his side without fanfare. Gloves already on. Her hands moved to the abdomen, not to cut, but to feel. To see with touch. Retroperitoneal, she said quietly. Nolan looked at her. How do you know? Pattern, Claire replied. Flank bruising, pressure drop with no visible abdominal pool. Nolan adjusted the retractor angle the way she had shown him. The field opened. The bleed revealed itself. There, Nolan breathed. They controlled it together. The patient's pressure climbed. The beep steadied. After Nolan stood in the hallway, pulling off his gloves. His face was drawn, but his eyes held something new. I would have missed that, he said. Claire's voice stayed level. You did not. Nolan nodded once, because you were here. Claire looked at him. Learn like I will not. Nolan swallowed. I am trying. Claire nodded, satisfied without smiling. 6 months later, the trauma bay took another mass casualty. A building collapse. Multiple victims. The alarms came fast. The air changed in that old familiar way. Claire stood on the observation deck above the bay, hands resting on the railing. She watched. Ethan led one team. His voice was steady. He called out airway first, then breathing, then circulation. Another resident ran triage with a marker and tape, directing flow with short commands. Nolan coordinated or calls without freezing. Vega moved between beds like a compass, correcting and supporting, never wasting motion. The bay moved like a machine built from practice and trust. Beside Claire, Vega leaned on the railing, eyes on the floor below. They do not need you down there, Vega said. Claire watched a chest tube go in clean, and fast hands steady, no hesitation. The monitor responded. A life turned back toward living. That is the point, Claire said. Vega glanced at her. How does it feel? Claire's throat tightened, then eased. She breathed in, smelling iodine and warmed blankets, not diesel. Terrifying, Claire said, and right. Vega's mouth twitched a rare hint of a smile. Good. Below them, the beeps layered into a rhythm that did not sound like panic. It sounded like work. Claire looked down at her hands, then back to the bay. She did not step in. She did not need to. She stood there, scene steady, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet did not feel like running. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.